Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Stormkeep, episode number 20, How to Counter Everything About the Idoneth Deepkin. My name is Paul, and today I'm joined by my good friend, Night Podcaster Mergonk.
Oh, hey guys, how's it going?
And we have a special guest. We have Akhelian King Carl, our expert Idoneth player, who's here to tell us how to counter his army for some reason.
Howdy, y'all.
So, How to Counter Everything is an ongoing series on the Stormkeep. We've done a few episodes about this, and we have a lot more coming. We examine popular and powerful lists in the tournament scene. We take a look at what makes them strong or just popular, because sometimes really popular lists aren't necessarily that strong, and we still want to look at those. We want to talk about what their limitations are, their weaknesses, and how to exploit them. And I think this is particularly useful for Stormcast, but every army can really use the knowledge that we have in here. We try not to focus on any particular list, because if you've been playing this game for any period of time, you know that any small change to a rule or points can drastically shift lists. So we try to focus on the faction as a whole, and we try to narrow in on how particular lists are performing and why they're performing that way. But we try not to go into very particular details because they can change overnight. We try to suggest overall strategies for how to beat these armies, and then in particular we try to look at how Stormcast can counter these units. So Carl, tell us about the Idoneth Deepkin.
Yeah, they're a very interesting and exciting army. They're an army that really concentrates a lot on movement and asymmetric engagements. You know, with this new book, we lost a lot of our rerolls that made us extremely consistent, but we've gained quite a bit of shooting and kind of an increased ability to even further influence the way the game is played on any particular turn. I think that's something that it's going to take a lot of time for folks in the Deepkin community to kind of figure out how to optimally play, and I mean, I'm certainly still struggling with it, but it's something that all other armies should also really take into account when going up against the Deepkin list.
Now, would you say it's fair to say that the Idoneth are not an easy army to play? Because they have a lot of mechanics that you just don't see in a lot of armies, and they're all kind of stacked together in this one in particular. So you've got like running and shooting and charging. You know, most armies can do maybe one of those. They've got fight first, you've got army-wide cover, you've got terrain spawning and giving you wards, you've got all these support pieces. Like, how hard of an army do you think it is to play Idoneth? Like, if you had to compare it to another one, like let's say Ironjawz.
Sure. So, I mean, I'm of the opinion that the Idoneth, they're an army that really requires a lot of sort of understanding of mechanics to play extremely well. But if you just wanted to pick up and play a list, just throw down some eels and a turtle or two, you can certainly have fun with it and play it fairly straightforward. You know, I'm also a big Skaven player, and compared to the Skaven, the Idoneth there's a lot more smoothness to the way that they play. Everything seems to work together and flow together, but it's important to remember how to sort of keep all that in your head while you're doing it. You know, it's not an army where you can just kind of throw, a turtle ahead unsupported and just sort of smash and bash your way through an opponent's army. You really got to make sure that you're lining up your combats, your movement is, very crisp and taking into account the possibility of being double turned. You got to make sure that your Reavers are in range of the overlapping buffs. You can't overextend with your turtle, or you'll lose a bunch of benefits. There's a lot of stuff like that that you really don't think about until you go to try and roll for your 5-up ward save from the boat, and you realize, well, shoot, I'm not wholly within 6 inches, and then all your thralls die, and then you're very sad. So
Right.
it's a fairly tough army to play.
Yeah, it's definitely closer to something like Seraphon than it is to something. What's a really simple army? Let's just say Stormcast. Yeah, they're pretty straightforward. They can be really straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's my. I guess the only other thing I would say, it's one of those armies that isn't just like tough to play well. It's also tough to play against well, because whatever your opponent has to remember, so do you, in order to really know what they're planning on doing in that particular turn. And we'll get into that later, but just as a header, I guess.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons you propose the idea of doing on how to counter on them, because they're a very unintuitive and complex army to play against. And in order to play against them, I think you have to understand what they're trying to do and what the counter to them is from their perspective. Like, you have to put yourself in the shoes of an Idoneth player and think, okay, what do they not want me to do right now? And then you have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a look at the allegiance abilities first, just kind of going over the numbers here. First one, I think arguably the most important one for how they play, is the Tides of Death, which is an army-wide effect based on the current round. So on round 1, the whole army has cover, that's low tide. On round 2, the whole army can run and shoot or run and charge, but not both, just one or the other. On round 3, the whole army strikes first, which is a crazy good ability. And on round 4, everything can retreat and shoot, or retreat and charge. Now, it should also be noted that you can reverse these at the start of the game if the right general, so that adds a whole layer of complexity on top of that.
Yeah, and the other niceness, very cool, is that the decision to reverse the tides is done before the start of the first battle round. So you can take that command trait, and you can still choose to maintain the way the tides progress. And similarly, with the rituals, those are also these bonuses that we'll get into in a second, I'm sure. But that's also before the start of the first battle round ability.
Yeah, run us through those rituals.
Yeah, so the rituals are basically, I always call them, ways to juice the tides, and it's just a little additional bonus you get for every single tide for all the tides. Way it works is you get 1 per Isharann keyworded special character, Isharann, or 2 if that particular character is a Tidecaster. So it's a great way to sort of counterpick your opponent's lists, and the way that they work, there's 4 of them. The first one is a creeping mist, and that's what's applied to low tide, and that means that you can't target a unit for shooting unless the attacking model is within 12 inches. So that means that really, in order to shoot, and again, you're still only shooting the closest eligible target, you can't even do that unless you're within 12 inches of that closest target. So it's a great way to force your opponent to bring their shooting things closer to you or miss out on that round of shooting. Now the next ritual is the Surging Stream, and that's +1 to run and charge rolls. So that's, again, that it combos with Flood Tides. Not only are you running and shooting or running and charging, but you're +1 to both the run and charge rolls. So it really helps you make those 3-inch charges automatically, which is very helpful. And High Tide is the one where you always strike first, and that particular ritual gives all Namarti, so all Reavers and Thralls, a 5-up ward save. So this is extremely helpful in certain army compositions, and usually my Namarti have all died by then, so it's not particularly helpful in others. And then Spiteful Riptide is the one that is associated with Ebb Tide, and that kind of gives you a small conditional bonus for retreating out of combat, which is on a 4-up when you do so. The enemy units can take D3 mortal wounds. This one is not nearly as impactful as the first 3, specifically the first one. The Low Tide ritual is insanely good.
Yeah, Spiteful Riptide doesn't see a lot of play. It's very situational. You kind of have to reverse the tide and get charged round 1 by your opponent, and you have to know that that's going to happen, and it almost never does. Even then, arguably Creeping Mist might still be better depending on the army. So you mentioned it there, but we should also mention Forgotten Nightmares. This is an ability that all Stormcast players just really hate because we love shooting whatever we want all the time. And Forgotten Nightmares prevents us from doing that. It forces us to only shoot the closest eligible target to the attacking model. So if you have a support hero behind one other Namarti model, can't shoot the support hero. It's a complete denial to long-range shooting. You have to shoot screens.
It's actually really, really powerful. It means any castle formation supported by support heroes or even a turtle, they're generally safe until you deal with the screens completely.
Oh, and it's definitely worth pointing out that this ability isn't like cover, where monsters won't get cover or something. Every Idoneth unit benefits from this. So you can't even shoot the giant turtle if it's behind one little foot soldier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is where kind of the Deepkin Castle comes into play, where it's, again, this is just kind of playing the complexity of the army, is that if deployed correctly, you should be able as a Deepkin player to guarantee the survival of important synergy pieces in your army.
Let's take a look real quick at the common enhancements. So we'll talk about these more when we get into the particular units that you'll see them on, but here's basically just a list overview of them. In terms of command traits, you've got Unstoppable Fury. Typically take this on the Akhelian King, and he gets +2 attacks for each enemy unit within 3 inches while they're in High Tide. That's any time you get High Tide, so keep that in mind when we talk about the King and his ability. There's the Lord of the Storm and Sea. For more Namarti focus builds, you can get a fairly wide 12-inch aura that gives you Battle Shock immunity, which is very useful because Idoneth do not generate any extra command points, and they love using them. They're just running 6 and using all out attack and all out defense as much as possible. There's Teaching of the Tur Scroll, which is how you reverse the Tides of Death. That's actually a command trait, so you give up these other ones in order to take that. And then there's a kind of niche one, but I think it's going to see more play as time goes on, which is the command trait that's taken by the Aspect of the Sea, where at any unmodified cast roll of 7 or higher lets you cast another spell. And this goes infinity. So you can continue casting spells until you run out of spells that you know, or you fail to cast it on a 7-up. And when you reroll every spell you cast, it's pretty likely you're going to get that. In terms of artifacts, the most common ones we see, the Armor of the Sithai, I think I'm getting that right, I'm pronouncing that Sithai. All hit 6 effects, so like long strike headshots are ignored. And as time goes on, they keep adding more and more abilities that work off this, like Nurgle and their diseases, those just get ignored. Night Haunt getting automatic wound rolls on 6, those get ignored. Exploding 6s from Daughters of Cain, all of that stuff just gets ignored. So this one, when we first looked at the book, was like, it's okay. You might prevent some long strike headshots every now and then, but it seems to be getting more and more value as they release more books. And I would say the most common artifact is the Rune of the Surge in Gloomtide, which lets you just summon another boat, which is incredibly strong.
Especially because we'll discuss the nature of the boats, but not only for the benefits they give out. Yep, they're impassable. So your opponent has to end a move past them or has fly or something. So it's just incredible amounts of movement blocking for your opponent.
Yeah, like we've talked about how useful the Prismatic Palisade and similar endless spells are for blocking movement. This thing is like that, except much bigger, much more useful.
Oh, and it gives you a ward save, and you get to place it anywhere, and you can combo with a bunch of other things to make it just extremely good. Unfortunately, you can't garrison any characters of yours in there because they all come with companions. So you can't cheese an insane Lotann aura around, but it's such an incredibly good faction terrain, and the ability to put a second one down is helpful.
Yeah. Very key to their playstyle, too, being able to block charge lanes or just deny movement in general. Looking at mount traits, I'd say the most common one that we see on the Deep Mare is the mount for the Akhelian King. It's a -1 hit for any enemies within 3 inches. They don't even have to be targeting the king, just if the king is within 3 inches, that unit has -1 hit. Which is very good, I would say, because everybody's using all-out attack, so this just counteracts that. Reverberating Carapace is probably the most common Leviadon mount trait. It increases the range of their key ability to give you more flexibility in how you position, lets you have a more loose formation, which is very useful in this game. And in terms of
I do want to
go ahead.
Point out a couple quick things. So the Void Chill Darkness, so it's -1 to hit for enemy units, not enemy models. So if you have a unit that I'm tagging one particular, say about 10 protectors, and I'm tagging your back guy, and you're engaging a unit of thralls in the front, it's not just the 2 or 3 protectors engaging the king that are at -1, it's that whole unit automatically.
Yep.
Yeah, they can do that, which is pretty sweet. And the other thing, too, is that another Leviadon mount trait that is my personal favorite is actually the Ancient Leviadon Beast mount trait. And that's one where if a Ren characteristic of a weapon used for an attack that targets the Leviadon is -1, you change it to nothing. So that basically means kind of all those things all those new Night Haunt that have Ren -1, if they don't get lucky on the Way of a Terror, they goes to Ren 0 against my 2-up save. And this is extremely helpful because it's also for shooting. So if for some reason you shoot through a screen and try and shoot the Leviadon with, Judicator bows or something, instead of having to spend one of those precious command points to all-out defense, I can just have this mount trait and still be on a 2-up save.
Yeah, it's got a lot of utility, for sure. And especially with new books, it seems like they're focusing more on effects that reduce save rolls rather than effects that increase your rend. For example, Night Haunt don't boost their rend, they just reduce your save. So the Leviadon mount trait would work against almost everything in that army. Looking at spells, we've got, I'd say, the 2 main ones besides the signature spells. One of them is Arcane Corrosion, which reduces the rend characteristic of 1 for an enemy, short-range spell, 12 inches. And then there's Countercurrent, which halves the run and charge rolls for an enemy within 18 inches. Deepkin are very much an army all about controlling enemy movement, and these fit into that playstyle very well.
And another exciting combo with the spells, there's only 4 of them, so there's not all that many, but the combo to watch out for is the Steed of Tides. You might see that on a Tidecaster and be a little bit interested as to why they're trying to teleport a hero that's not a monster. And the reason why is because it combos unbelievably well with the Gloomtide Shipwreck. It basically lets me teleport my character, deep strike him anywhere, within outside of 9 inches, and then place this impassable chunk of terrain in your backfield. And I can do this and pretty easily lock opponents into deployment zones or close off entire halves of the board with this.
Yep, and you can also cast it outside of unbinding range because you can just sit in the corner more than 30 inches from all enemy wizards and pretty reliably cast it, I'd say. It's not that hard of a cast.
Goes off on a 5, so it's pretty quick.
Yeah. Not totally reliable, I'm sure. everybody here has
Oh,
tried
it is
casting
not.
5s. The spells in general are very unreliable.
Oh, and then also something else to point out, kind of this Rune of the Surging Gloomtide, just sort of reading through the slide. It's important to note that you can only do this at the end of your first movement phase. So if you put your hero in the corner and then fail to cast Deed of Tides, you're then kind of stuck in where you need to put the boat. I was wondering, I don't usually put them in the corner, and that's kind of why. So you need to always have that backup in place in case you were to fail this Deed of Tides, the ability to sort of run your guy forward and pre-measure out where you're going to put this boat before you even deploy your character.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you fail that, or you could be the boats end up somewhere you don't really want them to be.
Really, Idoneth could probably be summarized with you have to play very carefully, very precisely. You can't just there's not a lot of room for error.
Mm-hmm.
No, there is none.
Let's take a look at the subfactions here. Let's see Iron Rack first. It has a heroic action that allows one Akhelian unit to have Flood Tide or Ebb Tide. And Akhelian units are the Allopex, the Leviadon, the Eels, and the King. I think that's an exhaustive list of them. I don't think the aspects have Akhelian.
Leviadon is
the
Akhelian?
most important thing. Leviadon's Akhelian, but so is the Thrallmaster. I'm just kidding. That's actually a terrible keyword for him. But yeah, that sums it up.
Yeah, so that's a very useful ability, being able to Flood Tide on turn 1 if you don't reverse the tides, or even Flood Tide if you do reverse the tides. So that's a very useful ability for a very fast kind of list. I don't know how much play that's seeing right now, because I feel like the next sub-faction is probably more important in terms of overall strategy, but that is one to watch out for going forward, I think. So tell us all about Nautilus, Carl, because you and I were very excited about this one before the book came out. We were like the two guys that knew about this.
This is the juice coming in hot. This is Big Daddy Turtle smacking everybody around. So Battle Line Leviadons, kind of neat, kind of annoying in terms of battle regiment placement, but man, increasing the fins and the jaws to Ren -3. Deepkin as a whole generally struggle with high armor save things, unless you do this. Because not only does it not matter if you're in Hunters, does it not matter if you have whatever special ability that stops monstrous rampages, but it's something that basically lets us compete with the big boys. If you want to bring Kragnos on that 1-up save, well, now it's a 4-up. You want to, it removes the save stacking that a lot of things would otherwise cause trouble for Deepkin. And the other thing about Leviadons is their little AC 130s. They've got these harpoons on the back that are essentially equivalent of 2 shark output. They're also totems, so Deepkin don't usually take a lot of characters. That's totally fine. You've got an 18-inch Leviadon bubble of nonsense coming out, and they're fantastic models that buff your army. They give everything +1 save. If you're already going to take one, the reason not to is because of the Ren -1 on the fins. As soon as you just remove that and make it instead incredibly good and unstoppable by your opponent, now they just
turn it into Gal Miraz, and you're like, okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Nautilus crazy.
Nautilus, the Battle Line Leviadon isn't that useful. Like you said, it has trouble fitting into specific regiments, especially Battle Regiment. And but no, the Ren 3 is huge. This army really lacks random mortal wounds, and adding a secondary source on top of an Akhelian King, which it probably isn't worth bringing more than one King, so having another Ren 3 source in your army really helps shore up a lot of gaps in this army.
It also takes the jaws from Ren 2 to Ren 3, so it just makes everything better.
Yeah. Next up is Morfan, something like that. The Lure Light ability, which is on the Soulscryer, we'll talk about later. Soulscryer, right? No, Render. Soulrender.
No, the Render.
Easy to get them confused.
It's very easy. Oh, it's Soul in the name.
He has an ability to revive Namarti, and if you go Morfan, he can revive 3 additional ones when he does that. Instead of just D3, it becomes 3 plus D3, which is good.
Yeah. Yes, and they also got randomly buffed quite a bit in the new book, because it happens now in every Battle Shock phase.
Yeah.
So you can absolutely start to just Grand Alliance death your Namarti up, and you want that value. It's very helpful.
Yes, because it opens up options to have a somewhat attrition style with Idoneth, which is not something they can normally do. They get hit and they die. that's the end of that. Looking at Fuethan, whatever.
Fuethan, yeah.
So it's got Bloodthirsty Shivers, which are cool, I guess. Not really, because they're expensive and they only fill 1 battle line slot for for 3 sharks. But the main key there, I think, is the battle line Allopexes, so you can double reinforce a unit.
Yeah, so the shivers, they're 3 individual sharks, so 1 shiver would fill all 3 of your battle line slots.
I thought it was just 1 battle line slot. Okay, well
No,
that's still not worthwhile, I don't think.
It's not worthwhile because Deepkin, your whole book is battle line, basically. So there's really no composition where you'd be like, man, I'm so happy I could take 3 single sharks instead of 30 Reavers, or 3 single sharks instead of 10 Thralls, 20 Reavers. You know, they're just, it's not a very good mechanic. It makes the battle regiment more difficult. The exploding hit 6 and kind of all the doubling your hits, it's only on 3, usually 4 attacks because of the jaws. So it's one of those interesting mechanics that doesn't really play out very well on the table. Battleline Allopexes, though, that you can see some chunky units coming your way.
Yeah, double reinforcing Allopexes makes them a very good unit to use all-out attack on when shooting and in combat. It just, especially with 3-inch coherency, they're really easy to maneuver around the board. That is a much better unit to use than whatever this Bloodthirsty Shiver is trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes me wonder why they even added it to the game, because if you can double reinforce Allopexes, that's just basically a Shiver, right? Like, I don't know what they were thinking.
It's probably for, like, if you really wanted to go anti-shooting. Like, sure, you could get a double reinforced shark, but let's say I somehow managed to get 10 crossbow adjudicators near it. Well, if there were 3 separate models, I can only really shoot 1 model.
Yeah, you usually take, if you were running this particular composition, you'd take at least a few individual Allopexes for that express reason. I don't think a competitive approach would be to take just 3 Allopexes and then no other screens, or just try and take 3 into 3 Allopexes. And that's just because you kind of live and die in this army by dictating combats and controlling shooting. And if you're able to shoot people's main source of damage, it's just the Deepkin just fall apart.
Mm-hmm. The battle line Allopex is also interesting for list building because, like with battle line Leviadons, being able to just fill a slot that you're already going to bring anyway is kind of nice. You can skim some points here and there on Namarti units that you may not find useful to your army.
Absolutely.
Looking at Dom Hain, this one got eroded, so basically how it works is if you went first in the round, and your combat phase, if a Namarti unit fights and has no enemies left after they fight within 3 inches, it can declare a charge and it can fight again. Now, this only works if there are no enemies within 3 inches, so you basically have to wipe out whatever you're fighting with. Which is very strong. Fighting twice with Namarti is a good ability because they do a lot of damage.
Yep, this is a very, this is one that before the book really came out and the rules sort of leaked, people were very excited about because it is dramatic. The downside with the going first is that Namarti really live and die by being within aura ranges of things that make them better and do more damage. And so if you, obviously if you're able to wipe out 2 units, that's huge value from the Namarti, but you're going to possibly be losing out on things like +1 to hit from the turtle or +1 armor save from the turtle. So
or the Thrallmaster.
The Thrallmaster. Although the Thrallmaster at the start of the combat phase is when
it's a pulse, it's not an aura?
I think he chooses. Let me take a quick.
He chooses something wholly within 12 and it just applies it to them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I never use it, but I think that's how it works.
And yeah, if you go second, heroes can issue redeploy 3 times, and if you do, it has to be 2 Namarti units, and the second and third time don't cost command points. So that seemed better before the book came out. I think it's of questionable value now. I'm not sure how much value you're getting redeploying 3 different Namarti units. It's a very strange strategy. And the problem with this one that Carl, you and I foresaw when we were talking about the book was you don't always have control over going first or second. And even when you do have control, you don't necessarily want to go first. Like a lot of times, I'm sure you want to go battle regiment, 1 drop, force the opponent to go first because you've got this beautiful castle deployment, and then you can try to fish for the double turn and just win the game off that.
Yep, that is the Deepkin way.
Yeah, and if you're doing that, which seems to be the Deepkin way, then you're not going first. It's like a win more kind of scenario where, and the fact that it's random, there's just a lot of downsides, and then you're looking at Nautilar and you're like, oh, that turtle could have been Ren 3.
Well, and if you want to do Thralls, Morphan lets you keep them alive longer, and that's usually the biggest issue with Thralls in general. And then also, you work for the Akhelian fighting stance. The way that it works for the Thrallmaster is you pick an ability at the start of the combat phase, and that is an aura ability. So it's usually for things wholly within 12 inches, so it would be required for them to remain wholly within 12 of the Thrallmaster should they then make a second charge. And so it's it's a fun and exciting ability to get off, but it's so conditional and just it's not reliable like the turtle, which will never let you down.
I think a lot of people are very blinded when they see Fight Twice after years of second edition. It's just like, oh, it fights twice, that's the best ability. I have to pick that. But it's not always the best ability. I think they've done a really good job reining that power back in with third edition so far. Looking at Briumdar, you can include 3 units in reserve with the Soulscryer instead of 2. So, does anyone use the Soulscryer? And is it ever useful to include 3 units in reserve? When
Soulscryer is conditionally useful.
Yes.
3 units with the Soulscryer is not conditionally useful. There's no real reason to need a 3rd unit.
Yeah, it does also increase the range at which you can set up near the Soulscryer, but I can't think of many reasons you need that.
No, unless you're bringing like huge hordes of like Reavers and you want to bring them.
Well, you bring usually the combo wombo combo is 20 Reavers with the Soulscryer, but your Reavers have 18 inches of range, so you're really not super duper concerned about the extending it ever so slightly. And the other thing too is that you're not only taking this thing that gives you an additional unit reserve in the slightly extended range, but you're also losing out on the other ones. And that's just where it's like, well, you can do both and just have a slightly less good, sneaky Reaver redeploy in a unit that already has the range to reach pretty much whatever you want it to with the Soulscryer Deep Strike.
Yeah, going from 2 units in reserve to 3 is not like if you could only put 1 unit in reserve, then going from 1 to 2 would be a big deal. That might see play, but going from 2 to 3 is like it's just not a big deal.
No.
Yeah, and also just for the record, so the Soulscryer, how that works, because it is not intuitive, is that when the Soulscryer is deployed as a deep strike, the Soulscryer itself must be wholly within 6 inches of the battlefield edge and more than 9 from enemy units, but the units that joined it do not have that edge restriction. They just need to be wholly within 9 inches of the Soulscryer and more than 9 from enemy units. So you already have essentially a 15-inch into the midboard deploy for those Reavers. So it's really, that's 33 inches from either board edge.
Yeah, we'll get to the scroll.
So
yeah,
that's just how it kind of that combo is even less useful.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's start taking a look at the units. Not every unit in this list is used equally, but we thought we'd first take a look. And it's not that big of a book, right? So most of the army is going to make the list. But for example, when we looked at Iron Jaws, we took a look at the most commonly used ones. We had to exclude some, and we put them on like a miscellaneous slide. So we're starting off with the King. There's one in every list. People thought for a while there'd be more than one because he's got a high rend attack, and they thought that Lord of the Tides could be used multiple times, which maybe it wasn't obvious that you couldn't. I didn't think you could, but thankfully they clarified in an FAQ that no, you cannot use it more than once. So there's one Akhelian King and only one in every list. And if he's the general, he can take the really good command trait that we talked about earlier that makes him do a ton of damage. But when he's the general, he also makes your guard units battle line, your Ishlaen and Morsarr guard. Looking at his stats, he's very fast. He's got a 14-inch flying move, and in Idoneth, everything can run and charge pretty much. Everything can retreat and charge later. So he's a very fast model. You're not going to stop him very, very easily. Flying allows him, with a small base in particular, he can just jump over screens if there's enough space to land a charge. He can do that. That's a very useful thing. He's got really good damage output. Looking at it, he's got... on these slides, we combine the damage and the attacks characteristic just to make it easier to look at. So, for example, his spear does 9 damage at 3s and 2s with Rend 3.
So it's actually 2s and 2s. And the reason why is because
he has the aura.
The War Scroll ability where he basically gives +1 to hit for attacks made by friendly Akhelian units in melee, excluding mounts, because you can't have nice things, wholly within 9 inches. That includes himself.
Yeah, so he's got 9 damage, and it's very accurate. 2s, Rend 3 is about as good as you can get in terms of accuracy in this game. Then he's got a bunch of attacks with the mount, 3d3, with pretty good accuracy, which will usually be on 2s and 2s as well. And then he's got some tail attacks, whatever, 6 at 2s and 2s. They help against certain things.
Yeah, the mount doesn't get the +1 to hit, and the +1 to wound is now pretty hard locked behind Lotann. So it's, again, I kind of playing this list. I haven't really had a lot of good luck keeping all the pieces together with Lotann for him to be wounding on 2s. Mm-hmm. But that is certainly the way that it would come about.
Yeah, looking at it ideally. And all of this is 2-inch reach, which is really cool because you can stick him behind a screen of Thralls, and then he can fight over the Thralls without getting shot at all, which is really nice utility. And then he does, a little bit of mortal wounds when he charges. Deep Mare Horn can do D3 mortal wounds after charging. And like you mentioned, he's got the +1 hit aura for Akhelian units, which weirdly enough, it doesn't affect their mounts, which, like, would the game be broken if it affected their mounts? I don't get why they decided to do that. Whatever.
It also doesn't affect the Turtles crew, which is interesting and exciting and fun.
Oh,
fun
is the Turtles crew companion?
So the turtle is a crew. So because
Right.
of that, it doesn't affect them because it's crewed by the mount. By the
Oh, right. Crew and companions don't count as.
But it
yeah.
does
For the purpose
affect
of the rules,
the
they're
Allopex.
mounts.
Yeah, the Allopex does not have that condition.
Yes.
Weird.
So the
Weird,
king, the king himself, I would call him fragile, but he's really hard to actually kill. So even though I'm going to call him fragile, like, he's going to live until your opponent overextends with him, and then you counterattack and kill him. Because of the way Idoneth play, they're very hard to shoot down, and you pretty much can't melee them because they'll fight first on turn 3. So it's really hard to get to this guy. But when you do, he crumbles like a wet bag. Like, 7 wounds with a 3-up save and no ward is pretty easy to kill, and I would say he's a high priority target because of how destructive he is. So people tend to put good damage into him, and he tends to die when he can. But a good Idoneth player will make it difficult to do that.
Unless you have magic, in which case you can just immediately kill him if you want, and they can do nothing.
Well, that's actually where the 7 wounds helps, I think, because even the most destructive anti-hero spell is the 6 mortal wounds from Kairos, and that's not going to get him.
Not in one turn, that's right.
Yep.
Well, yeah. Well, that's how they disrupt you, right? With the Chaos Spawn in your base, turn 1, just stopping you from moving. The other important thing is, like, the Lord of the Tides thing, it's in your turn only, meaning they cannot use it defensively. So this is important, because if the king gets charged, he can't just pop that to save himself.
Yes.
Yeah, and it is also D3 units, which in practice is 1 unit, and then sometimes you get another one, and then really rarely sometimes you get 2 more ones, but really you just get the 1. So it'll be whatever hammer unit they're using at that particular turn will get high tide, and then they'll strike normally with a 2nd unit. And that's usually enough. Like, you don't need always 3 units fighting first. 2 units is often enough.
Yeah, but it's so much more fun to have 3 and 4 units fighting first.
It's definitely more
against
fun.
Fire Slayers, sure.
And in terms of typical loadouts, we mentioned the command trait he usually takes is Unstoppable Fury, which gives him bonus attacks during High Tide, which, bonus attacks on that spear is crazy good. He can take the Arcane Tome for Flaming Weapon. That's a very good artifact for him. And the mount trait we talked about before was the Void Chill Darkness, which reduces enemy hit rolls if they're within 3.
Yeah, no, that is the iconic king, and he is phenomenal, and he'll do the work.
I'm really glad the king is good in this edition, because he is the iconic Idoneth model, and it was a big shame that he wasn't that good in the previous edition.
Yeah, that Lord of the Tides is... this is also a way for Deepkin to kind of cheese multiple rounds of Voice Striking first. The ideal is to do it on turn 2 and then get the double into turn 3, and at that point the game is done.
It's also worth noting that he doesn't just give the Strike First effect, he in particular gives High Tide, so if you have a way to give the Ritual that gives you a 5-up ward on your Namarti units, there's a little bit of a combo there. You can both have Fight First and a 5-up ward on that turn.
Well, the biggest combo is to do it to himself. Unstoppable Fury. He can cheese multiple rounds of combat of absurdly high damage output.
Yep, he is a threat, for sure. That's why everybody tries to kill him as soon as they can. Not only to take his damage out, but if you take him out before he uses Lord of the Tides, then that's a big blow to the army. All right, taking a look at Eidolon of Mathlann, Aspect of the Sea. So this one, right now, doesn't see a lot of play, I don't think, but I think it will in the future. Because I think it fills a niche that Idoneth are currently lacking in right now. So let's go over it. First off, they're fast. Both Eidolons are pretty fast. 12-inch flying move puts them up in that territory. They have this one in particular is pretty weak damage. Like, you can see he's going to do like 6 at Ren 2, which is cool, 2 with some weak weapon, and then 2d6 with basically no accuracy. Like, whatever, right? You're not bringing him for the damage. They are durable, for sure, as far as Idoneth durability goes. 12 wounds, 3-up save, 5-up ward. One of the few things in this army that can effectively save stack, right? Like, the Idoneth King can save stack, but he's probably just going to die before that matters. But this guy, 12 wounds and a 5-up ward, yeah, that's beefy. You can put Finest Hour, Mystic Shield, all-out defense, and you can tank a bunch of damage with him. He's got a Bravery 10 aura, which is very useful for eels, which are, sometimes you lose 2 and the last one just runs away. I think, right? They're still Bravery 7.
Well, yeah, sharks are Bravery 6, so if you take a unit of 3, it's
you
really
do got to worry about the Battle Shock. The Bravery 10 aura, it's
It's
I mean, it depends how
okay.
you want to play it. Yeah, if it's Namarti, it'd be kind of helpful against. And
Yeah.
especially now with this new like Night Haunt, no one gets to use command points in the Battle Shock phase. That might
Yeah.
become more helpful. Right now, it's like I'm really only ever taking maybe one Battle Shock as I care about, and if I know I'm going to take it, I can just bank a command point for it. But this
Yeah.
could get much more helpful.
If the game starts to trend into horde territory, Stormcast have that one mount trait that we're not currently using, but we could, which on a Knight Draconis you can ignore Battle Shock immunities by disabling
Yep.
commands in the Battle Shock phase.
Well, they're introducing more and more of these anti-battle inspiring presence abilities because we haven't gotten to this yet. But Daughters of Cain now, their most popular artifact is probably going to be Crown of Woe, which is a 15-inch range of no rally or inspiring presence.
Yeah. So the Bravery 10 aura is nice. It's something to keep in mind. It's like it's worth talking about, but it's not the reason you bring him. The reason you bring him is because he's a 2-spell wizard that rerolls all of his casting, all of his unbinding, and all of his dispels. And if he's included in your army, you're almost certainly going to take that command trait we talked about earlier, where every time you roll a 7+ on casting, you can cast again. And why this is useful? First off, Mystic Shield, right? Like you love Mystic Shield and Idoneth. But second is his signature spell, Tsunami of Terror, reduces the save rolls of D3 units by 1. Now it's only a 12-inch range, but there's multiple ways to work around that with a spell portal. You can teleport him with Steed of Tides. But as clarified in the FAQ, this spell, if you roll like a 2 or 3 on the D3 units, you can just pick the same unit multiple times. So this is potentially -3 to save rolls for a unit. And as we discussed, Idoneth have pretty low rend across the board. They really struggle with armored targets, and this guy just fits that niche perfectly. He covers a core weakness of the army.
See, and I think this is kind of a great example of the like army design where yeah, it's totally true, but it's only in combat, so you can't cheese a bunch of -1 rend shooting into people who have had absolutely destroyed armor. So I don't know if this whole book is full of extremely strong abilities with extremely stringent conditions. And although that one in particular isn't necessarily the worst condition, it is something that would keep an otherwise, outrageously good spell from being just an auto take. It's also nice to kind of note that if he successfully casts any spells, he does heal D3 wounds.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
with his Bravery 10 stacked on top of Heroic Recovery, he becomes even more resilient.
yeah, so he is a bit of a pain to kill. He actually, with that, especially with that, with that command trait, he's likely just going to run out of good spells to cast before, he
Yeah,
before he kind of finishes with his possibility for casting.
I'd say like yeah, the restriction is frustrating, but it's also kind of necessary. Like Idoneth, and we'll talk about this
Your
more once we
opinion.
get to the war scrolls. But sure, but like Idoneth is a real volume shooting army. With that kind of volume, I think it'd be hard pressed if a single spell could essentially turn your entire army into shooting -2 rend shots at something at the
Oh, I know
minimum.
that would be so nice.
It would make Idoneth a shooting army, and they're supposed
Yeah.
to be a melee army that shoots you on the way into combat. Like some shooting, mostly focused on the melee, whereas I'd say Stormcast are about 50-50.
Mhm.
All right, next up on the list is the Akhelian Thrallmaster. So the first two we looked at were more general. The Thrallmaster is really only useful if you have like 1 or 2 blocks of 30 Thralls. You would never use him otherwise. Like he's not worth bringing if you just have 10 Thralls in your list. He's fragile, nothing special in terms of durability. He's slow, only a 6-inch move. But if he's behind Thralls, you can't shoot him, you can't fight him, so he gets the job done. His damage is like okay, whatever, 10 attack, 10 damage at 3s and 3s rend 1, nothing special. But the reason you bring him is because at the start of the combat phase, you pick a stance for him, and then he gets an aura that buffs all Namarti wholly within 12 inches of him. And the effects from this aura are insanely strong. The first one is you can reroll hit rolls of 1, which in 3rd edition Age of Sigmar is like the best effect in the game. It's so strong. There's almost nothing in the game that allows you to reroll anything, and being able to reroll on Namarti, which are hitting on 2s and wounding on 2s if you do it right, that's just going to do a ton of damage.
So hilariously, it's actually just mathematically worse than the unmodified hit scoring 2 hits.
Oh, it is,
So
yeah, but it's such a strong effect in terms of consistency, right?
Yes, it's very nice, but this guy is one that he's really seen in very few builds for the most part, just because he costs about almost as much as 10 more Namarti. But when you do see him, it's usually with 2 blocks or 1 or 2 blocks of 20 Thralls and then 20 Reavers, just as sort of the core of the death bubble with him and a few other characters we'll probably talk about in a few minutes.
Yeah, because off the deployment, you can have him go defensive with his -1 to wound roll thing in your castle. Make sure your 30 block survives that combat, and then once you need to switch up, you go offensive. You can get the exploding sixes, and if you have a second one, you can get both exploding sixes and rerolling it rolls a 1. And he's not that expensive of a hero, so it could be reasonable to bring 2 of him just for that purpose if you go heavy on thralls. So another important thing about this ability, as we see more books that shut off rampages, is that this is not that shut off commands. This is not a command. This is just a thing that happens. So it's going to happen no matter how many abilities shut down commands like Roar or all the stuff in the Nighthaunt book. And it is worth noting it only works in the combat phase, so have fun shooting at thralls. That's just going to do full damage. And like you mentioned before when we were talking about, I think it's Dom Hain, thralls running and charging to combat will very easily be out of range of this guy's aura, especially if your thralls are running 6 and then charging. This guy's not going to keep up, and you'll very easily outpace him. So it's something you really got to pay attention to. If you bring him and you're running out of his aura, you got to wonder why you're even bringing him.
Right.
Carl, tell us about the Tidecaster, because this is one of the pieces in the army that has the most tech on it, I'd say. There's so many things you can do with this one model.
Yeah, this one, so it's 150 points, which puts it in the uncomfortable range. It's not technically that durable, 5 wounds, 4 up save, 5 up ward, but it actually kind of is once you start stacking stuff on it. If you Finest Hour now, it's a 3 up save, 5 up ward on a spellcaster out of nowhere for no reason. It's never going to do anything in combat. It's only a single caster, but it not only unlocks the ability to reverse Tides of Death on a unit that you kind of generally want to have, it also has a very strong War Scroll spell if you can get it off, which is on a 7-up, pick an enemy unit, D3 mortals, and -1 to hit. And that's just super nice to have around. But the biggest thing that I personally like it for, besides the fact that it lets me reverse the tides and throw a boat around while teleporting, is that it lets you pick 2 rituals instead of 1. And so this is just very helpful in kind of further optimizing your list against whatever it is you may be fighting. Generally, if you're not reversing the tides, the ritual you take is automatically going to be the shooting one to stop your opponent from shooting you to death. And then your second one, just being able to automatically guarantee 3-inch charges by picking the second tide is extremely helpful. And it's also just sort of nice to have that flexibility. If you're playing, a thrall-heavy list and you're going up against a shooting list, instead of having to take 2 characters, even though you likely would anyways, you can still take this Tidecaster and say, well, I'm going to make it so you can't shoot me, and my thralls are on a 5-up ward. So it's a very flexible model. It's not a necessary one unless you want to go fully into the tide reversal. But it's just one that is nice to have. Whenever I pick it and I build into it, I'm always thankful. Hey, not only does it unlock this army to begin with, but it also adds utility within the game.
Yeah, and it's one of the few wizards, like it's a cheap wizard, which is really useful because the other choice is Aspect of the Sea. So having just a cheap wizard with 1 spell, even if you don't cast Riptide, you could cast Mystic Shield, you could cast Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis in particular is very useful on the king. He can get in there and roar his target to prevent them from using all of defense or fight first or all kinds of nonsense. So
yeah, I was the other wizard. The other wizard is just the king with Arcane Tome. Yeah. That's sort of the iconic wizard in the list.
Yeah, but no, the Tidecaster sees a lot of play for all the reasons we talked about. So it's not a particular threat. Like once the game starts, most of its after the first movement phase, most of its value is gone because it has to drop the boat the first phase. It's not a high priority to kill after it's done its thing. It's all it's all front loaded. So don't worry about this thing after the game starts.
Yeah.
Like if you can kill it before it drops the boat, do it. 100% do it. It's such a big deal to deny that.
That would be crazy.
Yeah. And,
I'd be very sad if you did that.
It's only 5 wounds, so if you get lucky, you can get through that 5-up ward and kill it with a 6 mortal wound blast.
Good luck.
Hopefully you have some comments. Lots of them.
Let's look at the
5 Vindicator.
I'd say the most common support hero you see in lists is Lotann, because his buffs are so good.
And he's so cheap.
And he was so bad in 2nd edition, so I'm really glad that the stabbing octopus is a model you can see on the table now.
King Lotann.
Wasn't he in the start collecting?
No.
He was there. Yeah. No, never mind.
No. So Lotann basically, he's slow, quote unquote, with this paltry 6-inch move, pathetic. But he's otherwise got the usual 5 wounds, 4 up save, 5 up ward that you see. He does count as Isharann, which means that he by himself will unlock a single ritual for your army just out the gate. He can then also do that thing where at the start of his hero phase, he can then pick a ritual to apply. This only happens once per battle, but it's great in a pinch. It's nice to just sort of say, okay, this Namarti brick, it's 5 up 4. It's just a nice flexible thing, but none of that matters because he has +1 to wound rolls for Idoneth wholly within 12 inches, and for some reason, his includes the mounts, and no other, buff in this book does. But for Lotann, they made it very clear that his wound aura will make your sharks wound on 2s, and make your eels wound on 2s, makes everything wound on 2s. And he's also the cheapest hero in the book.
Yeah, they're really pushing this guy.
Yeah, they just had a bunch of him in the warehouse, and they're like, we got to move Lotann. How are we going to do this? This is how you do it.
They did it, so it's because
you can't buy.
I had to guess it's because he can't keep up with the mounts. Anything that has a mount.
Now, it is unfortunate that it doesn't work on shooting, because Reavers, Allopexes, and Leviadons would really need that.
God.
But like we talked about, Idoneth are not a shooting army. They have shooting, and it's good, but they're not a shooting army.
That's the thing, right? It's the butt, right? +1 to wound rolls, except for shooting. It's everything is like that.
I really like his ritual ability. It's incredibly flexible because you pick it at the start of your hero phase. So, if you know you're going to need shooting protection, and after round 1, or let's say you're reversing the tides, and you want that shooting protection, yeah, there you go. You have it. And it lasts until your next hero phase. It's not even just something for your turn, right? It lasts all the way. So if you get doubled, and you still have the shooting protection, that really limits what your opponent can do.
Yeah, but the big problem is that it also is useless if you get doubled, and you wanted to have it as a flexibility, because that's sort of your hero phase.
Yeah, it's better to use it and not hold on to it.
You got to really protect.
But here's the thing, when I think of the armies out there that really want to shoot you, that first ritual, the one that doesn't let you be shot within, unless you're within 12, unless you're Stormcast with a translocation and what have you, it's so good.
Oh yeah, it's going to ruin Daughters of Cain.
Yeah, telling 40 Sentinels, 15 Blood Sisters, even a bunch of Seraphon, Bastiladon lineups that, hey, for 2 turns you're not going to shoot me because I have something out front. You have to shoot that one, and you can't shoot it unless you're within 12.
That's not how it works. It's not how it works, unfortunately. It just protects that single unit. That unit will still be able to shoot because they have to shoot the closest valid target. And that unit is no longer a valid target unless you're wholly within 12 inches. Yeah, but you can't just remove a shooting phase with that. Again, it's a Deepkin. So it's not like it says that comboed with Forgotten Nightmares allows you to prevent all shooting. It just simply means that they can't shoot that single unit unless they hit the condition, but they can still shoot past it then. So if he puts that on a Thrall screen and the next closest unit is him, you can just shoot him to death. Or just shoot the turtle behind the Thrall screen, because that's actually the closest unit.
Interesting.
You have to be
I didn't think how that's...
Yeah.
That's not how I had it played against me, but sure.
Not by me.
But not you.
I don't cheat. But yeah, so it has to be able to be a valid target. You can't just ignore shooting him.
Yeah, but Lotann's pretty much in every list. His +1 wound aura is so good. It's great. And he's cheap.
Don't get it twisted. Yeah, 115 points, automatic. Playing an 1885 point list plus Lotann.
So let's talk about the Eidolon of Mathlann, the aspect of the Storm. This is the fighting version of the other one. The other one's more of a support piece, meant to boost your other units and give you some utility. This guy is just a punch man. He just charges in and fights things, and he also has a +1 wound aura like Lotann, but unlike Lotann, it doesn't work on mounts for some reason, which
much worse.
Yeah, much worse. So he's like the other Eidolon. He's fast, he's durable, but instead he does a lot of damage, I would say. On the charge, his spear does 15 at Rend 2 with good accuracy, 3s and 2s, and then his other hook does 8 damage at 3s and 2s. And he's got this whatever 2d6 thing that the other one has as well. He can always retreat and charge, not just during Ebb Tide, which is really good because you can always be where you need him to be to support your other charging eels and things like that. And he can also take the command trait to give him access to monstrous rampages as if he was a monster. And he can always take a Flaming Tome. Arcane Tome.
Yeah. Flaming Tome sounds better. Sounds a lot better.
It sounds pretty cool. That in. So he is expensive, and he's marginalized by Lotann because, like we said, his +1 wound buff doesn't work on mounts. Lotann's does. So you don't see this guy very often, and there's a reason for that.
He does also heal when he charges.
Yeah, I kind of wish he healed at the start of the combat phase, so if he took damage from Unleashed Hell, he could heal it up.
Oh, yeah.
But the way it works, he heals himself, and then he gets shot. It's just not that
good. Like Carl said, there's always a but. There's always a but.
There's never a good thing. It's always it could be great if it was just one quick change. The other thing too that makes him not nearly as good is the King's damage is just so much better when he gets the unstoppable fury.
Yeah, if you need a
Here's
fast
my question though:
just use the king.
if you're worried about the king's fragility, is this guy ever worth considering over that?
Well, I own 2 of this model, and I used to run 2 of this model in the last book, so I love this model very, very much. And there are some builds I could see it being good in, and that's I haven't played this yet, but him with eels is actually pretty darn good because the +1 to wound affecting the mounts is extreme. Sorry, not affecting the mounts doesn't matter quite as much. Then you get into the question of, well, if you're taking this guy for damage, the King and Lotann are 365. This guy is 355. What I mean, what's the
well, the argument is that he's fast and he can keep up with the hammers, while Lotann can't because of his pathetic 6-inch move.
The King's faster. King buffs the eels. King does more damage. King puts stuff at -1 to hit.
Yeah, I think you'd run both. You'd run this guy and the King in some kind of like alpha strike, all cavalry, go forward and hit stuff kind of list. Unfortunately, you can't do that. Yeah,
alpha strike. Yeah, they do badly. So I love this guy. I will try. Once I stop playing sweaty people like Murgonk all the time, play some casual games. I'll start testing out things that might be good.
Once I move past my annihilators, they'll probably move on to this model.
Yeah, once you stop punishing me horrifically for taking fast, fragile powerhouses that you can charge me, we'll see.
Yeah, maybe.
If you don't want to play fast, fragile powerhouses, stop playing Idoneth. That's my advice.
No, I like to have those. That's good for me. It's just it's always the 3 Grand Hammers. Are those going to basically take me out of the game? And
yes, the answer is yes.
They kind of ruin this guy. So
the answer is yes. If you're running eels with this guy, the answer is yes.
Yeah, but the turtle will put some damage down.
Side note, Murgonk, remember when we first saw the Stormcast book and we were all in on the 6 Annihilator train? It just turns out that 3 do so much damage you never need to reinforce.
Yeah. 3 also like such a small footprint. Like I see Carl, he takes like 25 minutes on his turn because he has to measure out where 3 Annihilators could possibly land.
3 sticks out. Cross-measuring.
He's like measuring every single inch where he could put the boat. It makes so many people nervous. It's crazy.
It's about the size of like this guy, the Storm's base. Like it's not a big area at all.
Yeah, not at all. Because you can put them in a triangle formation. It's just like a tiny little area.
Yep. And the more you try to deny space, the more things get hit by their landing impact. So great unit. All right, talking about units, let's first look at the Akhelian Ishlaen Guard. First up with the commonly referred to as the Shield Eels, or Shields with 2 E's. They're
what?
You've never heard that? Shields with 2 E's?
I've never heard of Shield.
What are you talking about?
Well, there you go. You can take that with you. If nothing else,
not taking that with me. That's staying here.
So they're very fast. They've got a 14-inch flying move, so like they can keep up with the King. They can, with their small footprint, they can just jump over screens, which is really fun to do. Unfortunately, it's not very useful because they don't do a lot of damage. But they are, as far as Idoneth go, these guys are relatively durable. 12 wounds on a 4-up save for their point cost isn't very good, but they ignore all positive modifiers to save rolls. And if they charge, they get a save characteristic of 3-up, which we love 3-up saves, but not when they're ethereal and you can't save stack on top of it. So not that useful. They have relatively poor damage for their cost. Like each rider does 3 damage and each mount does 3d3, but it's on 3s and 3s Rend 1. It's not that accurate. Relatively speaking, with 3s and 3s Rend 1 used to be really good. These days it's not so much. Hard to give them +1 to wound. It's really hard to give them any bonuses to rend. And the worst part is they only have 1-inch reach. So like you could, in theory, make a really durable brick of these guys because if you double reinforce them, you'd have 36 wounds on a 3-up ethereal just charging and pinning down the whole enemy army. But because they only have 1-inch reach, they're going to do like 0 damage. And Idoneth are an army that needs a lot of damage, and these guys ain't it.
Yeah, and they cost the same as Morsarr, and they have the same durability as a Grimghast Revenant or whatever the random ghosts are. I mean, this is 4-up ethereal is just kind of insulting. An army that stacks save modifiers by existing, turn 1 you're in cover, and also by a turtle. Now I'm on a 2-up save with Morsarr versus this 4-up save. It purposefully ignores the synergy that makes the army work. So. People are scared of them because of the save.
Do you think they're paying for the sins of second ed?
They're paying hard for the sins, for being 195 points for 3, when you could essentially just take a Morsarr dart that will actually do a ton of damage and have relatively similar survivability and also mortal wounds.
They're paying for the sins of first edition still. Like these guys are just
Deepkin just had a first tome. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Deepkin just had a first edition tome, and they essentially wrecked face in second edition with that.
Now, these guys could see a lot more play if they had the right points. Like if they were 130,
sure.
you could see a lot of.
Then I'm.
I think just for the runes, I think maybe 165, 170, maybe.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You drop these guys to a competitive price, like 150 for 3. Yeah, we got a list cooking. So just keep an eye out for these guys.
Fishes, if wishes were horses, then beggars would ride. So, one day I'm waiting for that errata to drop the turtle, drop the Ishlaen.
I mean, bro, we've said the same thing about Vanquishers, Vigilers. It's like Vigilers are 195.
That's why I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, I know.
It's Look, they have a potentially cool niche that is just invalidated by their damage for point ratio. That's all.
Yeah,
it could change. Probably not. Looking at the other one, the Morsarr Guard, the Spear Eels, they're also fast. They still have the same, 12 wounds and a 4-up save. They're not ethereal, so whatever, but you can save stack them. So if you get a big unit of these guys, you can actually add save bonuses and make a difference. Unfortunately, like the guys with the swords, the guys with the spears are also 1-inch range, which is very confusing. They do good damage if you charge. Right, you'll see that their profile there, the riders deal 4 damage at Rend 2, as opposed to the sword eels, which were 3 damage at Rend 1. Now, if they don't charge, these guys actually do less than the other ones, which is really sad. And you can't always be retreating and charging in this army, so getting the retreat...
Unless you're an Iron Rack, then you can.
Yes, yeah, that's why you play Iron Rack.
That, yeah.
Yep. And once per battle, they have this really... This was a scary ability. I remember in first edition, getting hit by this, you would... just take a whole bunch of mortal wounds at the start of the combat phase, and then they'd fight first, and you're like, oh, this unit's so broken, but like, it's just not that good anymore, man. It's for each model in this unit, you roll 1 dice, and for each 4-up, it's 1 mortal wound, or D3 on a 6. Like, that's just nothing.
Well, there's an important last sentence there, which really is fun because it encourages taking the Morsarr darts, which is add 1 to the roll if the number of models in the enemy unit is greater than the number of models in this unit. So that's where this gets actually pretty decent, is if you've got like a 5-man unit in Stormcast, like a Protectors or something that's got a really good save, and I throw 3 Morsarr, now it's on a 5-up you take D3 mortals, and on a 3-up it's 1 mortal.
Right, because it's not unmodded.
Kill me.
And
you kill me back, no problem, but that's sort of, it encouraged actually taking less with that particular rule.
I just wish it was every turn and not once per battle.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't seem like a strong enough ability to justify once per battle.
I totally
especially agree. Because the reach is 1, so even if you reinforce this to try and do max mortal wounds, it means you'll only be hitting with 4 of them at any given time.
Well, it's 1 enemy unit with 1 inch of this unit and roll a number of dice with a number of models in this unit, so you'll still get to roll the 6 dice.
What I'm saying in melee. In melee, you'll hit them with probably 4
Unless you do you can make it so that you can get all 6 in. That's actually, it's not that super difficult.
Yeah, because these guys, unlike Dracolines or
they're on skinny bases.
Oh, they're on those thin bases, aren't they? You can run. Yeah, okay.
I just hate that rule. I hate that we have to have these discussions about how to fit bases in on a model or units with 6 models. It's so.
But hey, this is the classic Deepkin butt, right? Like they have this charging roll, this mortal wounds, but it's super conditional and still random even after that, and there's a 1-inch reach with spears. So it's just, there's always a catch.
I guess this is part of the push to reduce mortal wounds across the board in every army that's not Stormcast, because Stormcast are allowed to have a lot of mortal wounds. That's our class, or that's our army identity, and that's cool. Sorry, everybody.
How many points are these guys?
195.
195. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm okay with it being once per game.
They're pretty reasonable. I mean, you also get +1 to charge because of the musician.
Yeah, they're not bad. So the problem is they're not good, but they're not bad.
Exactly.
Now let's look at the Allopex, which I think is good. It's also
it's that a lot, but these guys get very excited about these guys.
It is also fast, 14-inch flying move, so it keeps up. You can have a whole army of just like eel, shark, king, everything keeps up with each other and one big threat. The Allopex, I'd say it's if you focus it, it'll die, but it'll take 8 wounds. That's not nothing, right? Like it's not trivial to kill these things. They have a huge threat range, right? 24 inches on their guns, and then 14-inch flying move is crazy. You cannot stay away from these guys. They outrange long strikes, which is a feat in and of itself. They have pretty good damage, both shooting and melee. And in particular, the ranged attacks are interesting because they have two different loadouts. You can go like the high damage route, where you get the harpoons, 43 damage at 3s and 3s, rend 1, which is like it's okay, right? It's not great, but it's okay. But the net, I think, is really interesting because if you hit a guy with the net, any unit that you hit cannot make pylon moves for the rest of that turn, which has crazy utility, right? Like if you play against horde armies, anything with a 6-inch pylon, like zombies, it's really powerful both offensively and defensively because you can use it with Unleash Hell, and if you roll that 4 up to hit, then yeah, they can't pylon, which is crazy strong. In melee, they do about 12 damage total each, potentially more if you're fighting a wounded unit. Not always. Well, what's the but?
Well, there's always a but. So against horde armies, the net, it's okay. It's a 50% shot of even hitting with it, and you can instead just have 4 shots that you'll likely cheese some damage through, especially DOK and Night Haunt. And the net also with that 18-inch range, it doesn't seem like a lot, like a big difference, but it definitely can be. And without any rend, it's a utility piece in an army that avoids pylon issues by just killing whatever it's engaged with.
Right. This is why I really like the double reinforced units of Allopexes, because you can bring 1 net in that squad of 3, give the whole unit all out attack. Why not?
You cannot do that.
Oh, it has to be all the same weapon?
All models in the unit must be armed with the same weapon option.
Oh, man.
Oh, man.
That makes it actually
terrible.
bad. Yeah, that actually makes it bad. Because you're totally right. Otherwise, yeah, I'd take 3, put 1 net, 2 guns in there, and then everything's hitting on 2s. But no, it's an all or nothing thing now. It used to be the other way around when it was really great, and I always used them. But especially now when it's hitting on 3s, you miss sometimes. On Unleash Hell, hitting on 4s, missing half the time. Just bring more guns. Just bring more shoots.
Yeah, that's fair. Ouch! I didn't know you could not customize them.
I'm double checking that right now.
Yeah.
It's the last sentence in the bolded description.
Yeah, because I remember you having those mixed loadouts back when we played with your second ed book.
Oh,
so with all the rerolls too. Jesus
models, 98% conversion rate of attacks to damage. It was glorious. They took it from me.
So, okay. Other good things this unit has, 3-inch coherency is cool if you reinforce it.
Extremely cool.
Yep. I wish a lot more units had that, frankly. And it kind of fits with their aesthetic, too. They're kind of large predators.
They're hard to
they only got 1-inch range in melee, but because they have 3-inch coherency, that's not a big deal. And
big deal.
You should watch out when you reinforce them, because Bravery 6 means if one dies, the other one can just run away. So just watch out for that. And you don't want to be spending Inspiring Presence command points on these guys.
No, and I have lost into Battle Shock, and it makes me extremely sad. But some big important things here. Number 1 is that with the champion, it's a free upgrade if you have 2 or more in a unit, and it gives +1 to hit rolls for attacks made with that model's melee weapons. So the bites hit on 2s, and the sticks on the back hit on 2s, just immediately. So that's pretty good. And then the other thing about this, which I think really gives it a whole lot of utility, is that with the 4-shot harpoon launcher, the big issue with Reavers, whom we'll talk about in a moment, is that you can actually reduce their efficiency by doing wounds to the unit. You do 7 wounds to an Allopex, it will still shoot you with that profile. It will still fight you at its top profile. It is just it's a unit that can be buffed by the turtle, can be buffed by the cover, so it can be sitting on a 2-up save turn 1 equivalent, and they are hard to kill. They're super fast. They contribute in the shooting and in the combat phase, and they're my little battle tactic machines. You want to get Savage Spearhead, chuck some Allopexes back there. You want to reach out and get rid of a wounded battle line that someone tried to be sneaky with, just throw some Allopexes out there. You want to shoot a single character who's not within lookout, sir. Maybe they are. Allopexes will do it. They're just phenomenal little utility pieces. Take them units of 1. You can screen. You can still go after single characters. You can dictate target priority by putting a single Allopex on a 2-up save in front of like an Ironclad or something. And now they're red -1 makes it'll still probably do okay. I mean, they're just so good. I love this unit. They're phenomenal.
Yeah, they're very much like a Stormcast chariot, and almost similar in terms of almost everything in terms of like size and speed and everything. Stormcast chariots have a lot of the same things going for them. It takes 12 wounds before you lose any board space, right? Like that's a thing people don't really notice is as you lose models in a bigger unit, like 10 models, you lose 5 of them. You're giving up board space as you do that, which is like the whole game is won through controlling the board. Whereas Allopexes with their 8 wounds, you have to do 8 wounds to get rid of that board space. It's a really nice thing that is often overlooked.
And it's shooting you the whole time.
And biting you, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great unit all around. Hopefully we see more of them because it's also a great model.
I ran 9 against Morgana, didn't go so well, but
Oof.
you know.
Oh right,
I
well
like
that's
4.
good.
The 2x2
Mhm.
is kind of a nice staple that I think a lot of people are taking. At least 1 unit of 2, and then you can have generally either 2 units of 1 or another unit of 2.
Now in that setup, would you take 1 net just for the utility? I think you might after you see what Nighthaunt and Daughters do.
Yeah. So with that particular setup, you actually very well might, but that's also one where it's really kind of heart of the cards, right? If it works once, the utility will outweigh all the times it didn't hit. But if it doesn't
Yeah.
work once, then you're just kind of sad. But
Yeah.
I agree. I think if I'm playing in this new Nighthaunt meta, if I'm not just going all in on volume of fire, then the net is going to be very helpful. Daughters, I think,
Mhm.
don't require a net to be not worried about because
I disagree. Sisters of Slaughter piling in 6, fighting twice are going to be brutal.
Yeah, but then Sister Slaughter also aren't probably charging. They'll just like run up in your face and pile at 6 most of the time.
Yeah,
I'm just still just going to shoot them to death. That's
Yeah.
the Deepkin. Yeah.
So let's talk about.
Also, they just DOK get hosed by shooting now. So
let's talk about. I think the best model in the whole range. I don't think that's up for debate. And if it is, you can just leave this podcast right now. The Leviadon is the best model in the range. I think.
My favorite model in the army. I love this big turtle.
It's such a cool model. I've strongly considered starting Idoneth just for this model. It's so cool.
So good. Well, actually, it's not that good unless you put it in Nautilus. If it's in Nautilus, it's great. Otherwise,
the model itself, though, it doesn't care what subfaction you're in.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
So it is fast, but it's not as fast as the other stuff in the army. It's only a 10-inch flying move, which is really unfortunate because that extra 4 inches sometimes is what you need to stay in range of its board drum and other various support abilities. It is very durable, especially as far as Idoneth are concerned. It's 16 wounds on a 2-up save, which does get bracketed after you take 9 wounds, but like you're probably gonna die if you're taking that much damage anyway, right? Like you're getting hit by annihilators while you're save debuffed or something. Like
it's durable.
Yeah.
Asterisk for Idoneth.
For Idoneth, yeah.
Yeah, for Idoneth, yes. Exactly.
And it also has good damage. Not for its cost. Like you could get a lot more damage output from just bringing more Allopexes, but on top of everything else that it has going on, it does have good damage. So it's like having 2 Allopexes strapped to its back, shooting harpoons at you, which is great. Melee attacks are also very strong, like we talked about. The crew they have rend, surprisingly. A lot of other crews in this book don't. They're on 6 attacks on 3s and 3s, or 6 damage. The Finns can do 16 damage on 2s and 3s, and then easy to get a +1 to wound with Lotann. And then the Jaws do 6 on 2s and 2s, rend 2, and both Finns and Jaws can go up to rend 3 in Nautilus, which is insane. And the Jaws can spike high and do a bunch of mortal wounds as well if they rolls a 6.
I have played probably 20 games of Deepkin in 3.0, or with this new book, and I have never rolled a 6 to hit with the Jaws. Yeah. So one day it's going to happen.
It's in the rules. I've heard it can happen.
People tell me all the time of how their Leviadons have killed things and done 12 mortal wounds, and I just cry a little bit. One day, though. One day.
It has a custom stomp that does d6 mortal wounds if you hit something with 1 wound models, which right now isn't very useful, but will become more useful as time goes on. More and more units are being added with 1 wound that are a threat, especially Nighthaunt. We're talking about them a lot, but there's other armies as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say this is more of like a Graveguard bonker than a Nighthaunt. You got that 5-up ward, and Nighthaunt makes it real sad.
Yeah.
Well, they can't respond to this with a 5-up ward. I mean, it's a stomp, so.
When does I guess I don't know when the Nighthaunt
end of charge
No. So the Nighthaunt Discorporate only gets triggered if you target it as a melee or a shooting attack.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well then.
Yeah. So no spells, no charge abilities, nothing.
Instead of a 5-up ward.
Yep. And Ren doesn't do anything against ghosts, so you might as well.
Yeah, the turtle is not great against the ghosts.
Well, it could kill.
Well, actually, no. Like you might want to roar them. If the Nighthaunt player didn't bother to take hunters, you might want to roar them so they don't Discorporate.
Well, yeah, they will take hunters. They will.
I mean, they're gonna take. Come on, man. They're gonna take hunters. They're gonna take hunters with their big fat ghost units, and it's gonna make me really sad. And then I'll have to take a bunch of be annoying about it.
Yeah, they're gonna charge 30 blade, guys.
Save it for the Nighthaunt review. We're getting there.
I know. I'm getting ahead of myself.
All right,
continue. All right, Void Drum.
Void Drum.
What does it do?
It's +1 save for all Idoneth units if they have less than 9 wounds while they're near the turtle. So it stacks with cover, and it stacks with all-out defense, and it stacks with Mystic Shield, and it stacks with a 5-up ward that you can get from boats and High Tide. It's a fantastic ability that saves this army from being trash, I think. If you didn't have this, oh man, things would be really rough for Idoneth.
Well, this is a topic of hot contention amongst the Deepkin people, and I'm of the opinion that if you're not running this in Nautilus for 500 points for a bunch of Rend 1 attacks that don't really, they'll do a ton of damage, but Rend -1 is not really getting you there.
It's
then
probably better to just run cheap
thralls.
disposable screens of thralls. Yeah, like how Stormcast bring liberators and just put them in the way. I can see that.
I'm just saying, like, if you're thinking, well, this is going to give, +1 save, I could just take instead, another 40 thralls, and then the +1 save is drowned out by bodies here.
Yeah.
So it's phenomenal as like an additional synergy piece, but to take this in Morfan or in another like Dom Hain, not a bad idea. But I personally, this is a personal decision, would rather just take more guys.
Now, the argument certainly is that it can keep up with faster units that the thralls might not necessarily be able to. So like this thing can swim up and stay in range of your Allopexes and your Eels that need the +1 save. So
absolutely,
especially with the Carapace mount trait. Yeah.
So in addition to giving you +1 save, it also, if an enemy is within range of your Void Drum, then your Namarti units have +1 to hit against them. And now I believe
it's wholly within 12 inches.
Is it wholly within? Let's double check.
Yeah.
I think it's
always the butt.
Always
the butt.
Yes, yeah. Enemy units have to be wholly within 12 of the Leviadon. So it's like a defensive thing if you're getting charged, but that's still fine. Now, I believe that does work on shooting and melee, which is the one time you don't have a butt in this book. This can actually buff Reavers for free, which is nice. Don't have to waste commands on.
It's absolutely incredible. Unleash Hell, hitting on a 2, winning on a 3.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Now, this is just a support piece overall, right? It does have pretty good damage, but like you said, 500 points. I think it's worth 500 points in Nautilus. I can see skipping it in other lists, but I guess I just always play Nautilus. It's so good in that faction.
I've been heavy into the Nautilus. I'm a big fan. Yeah,
and
no, again,
you know what's really interesting? I honestly thought this thing would get separate points for Nautilus and for non-Nautilus. Like, I don't know if you noticed, the Gristlegore Terrorgeist got that. Like, the Gristlegore Terrorgeist is about... Yeah, the Gristlegore Terrorgeist is like, for some reason on War Scroll Builder, it's about 30 points or something more expensive than a normal Terrorgeist.
See, the thing is, I think this is 500 points worth in Nautilus, but I don't think it's 500 points worth in any other faction.
Depends on what the rest of your list is. Like, if you bring this thing outside of Nautilus, the rest of your list has to compensate for its damage.
Yeah.
It's not doing all... I mean, the Sharks, if you take 3 Sharks, it's going to out-damage it.
More or less,
495, yeah. And give you more units, gives you more flexibility, they're faster.
But you can take 3 Sharks and a Turtle and have all those Sharks with +1 save. So
sure, that's 500 points for +1 save. It's double the number of Sharks you're going to take.
How desperate are you for +1 save in this army?
I mean, honestly, not a huge...
Pretty desperate. I mean,
it's nice to have. So let's think about it. What am I worried about initially with +1 save? Things I like to have with it are on Sharks.
Iron Jaws.
So Iron Jaws are going to be killing Thralls. On the first turn, this army does not win by surviving attacks back. This doesn't. They just die. I don't do anything. I can't survive mortal wounds. I can't survive any of these juiced Rend things. Thralls max out on a 4-up save. I'm on a +1 save to start the game automatically. So if they're in Hunters, I all-out defense, and now I'm still going to be on a 4-up save against Rend -1. It's just nice to have the +1 save. It saves me a command point at times, but it's a quarter of your army. And if your question is ever, I want it to buff things, you can just take more of those things. Now, if you're a Nautilus, and it's not only the buffing things is a fun bonus as it stomps through everything with Rend -3, then it's a different story. But to just have it to be a buff piece instead of taking more of the things to be buffed, people go back and forth on it. I got a lot of strong opinions about this, and I like to throw a big turtle with Ancient and Nautilus up into someone's face and just smash it.
Well, damage is utility. We've said that before on this podcast, and along with things like the game is won through movement. That's just one of the core rules of the game. Damage is utility. Doing more damage opens more avenues for other strategic options down the road.
I will also say that his 10-inch move, he's got a fat base. This can be a small issue if you're not very careful with boat placement, especially if you take bonus boats, because zoning out your own Leviadon is something that I've heard could happen to people, and certainly I've never done to myself because that would be ridiculous. But theoretically, you could absolutely block out your Leviadon from doing what you want to do because of the way that you've placed terrain or the way that things are just arranged.
Morgonk, I will pay top dollar for photos of him screwing up his turtle placement and zoning himself out.
Well, he kind of did that once, but
What are you
also I made
talking
an
about?
11 charge. Yeah, well, the time I killed your turtle with the Annihilator, Blaze of Glory.
Oh yeah, after I killed the unit, that's fine. It was always gonna happen, man.
That's a good trade. I mean, that's a good trade.
How'd that-
240 points
how'd
to
that game
500.
end?
I'll take that.
How'd that game end?
Oh, you got the double, but shit, that's just how
Oh,
the game goes.
tactical trades. But I think that also does sum up a lot of kind of the overarching theme of Deepkin, which is it's such a priority dependent army where it's frustrating at times because the army itself really relies on being able to dictate or at least compensate for priority. So in order to take things like Hunters of the Heartland or extra artifacts or whatever, you are potentially just sacrificing games. And I think that that's something that really is difficult for me when I play because I don't like to leave things up to dice rolls, especially in age of priority rolls. And so it feels like you're kind of locking yourself into a particular style of build just because Deep can handle being doubled so poorly.
Can I ask you something? What happens? Let's assume they get rid of Battle Regiment, so all these builds that are trying to outdrop you to dictate priority go away. How does that affect you?
I think Idoneth are dead. If they can't control first turn,
very poorly.
Very poorly. Okay. No. I mean, I understand. Like, not taking Battle Regiment is poor. What if everyone else also loses Battle Regiment? Is my question.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look and kind of see what the minimum number of units are you can take to still be relatively competitive in that sort of universe. The big problem with Deepkin is they don't have any god models. They don't have anything that I can just put down, take up. There's no Archaon. There's nothing I can put down and be like, this eats up. In this particular situation you're describing, where Archaon would then be not only a good model to have, but also essentially guarantee you could have more control over priority. Deepkin don't really have that outside of the turtles. I think I would unironically consider double turtle Eidolon of the Sea, and then 20 Reavers.
Wow.
And have that be a list.
Well, what about a situation where players have to roll off for first turn no matter how many drops they get?
Oh, I mean, again, this is kind of in this imaginary, beloved, wonderful world. If there was a way to then influence that, and that's kind of how I would personally, I'm not a game designer or anybody who knows what they're talking about, but I think that having an ability to influence priority rolls based on stuff that you do in game, as opposed to just like guaranteeing it, would be very cool. Where it's like, if you were to like take a battalion that was somehow like weird or some shenanigans like that, it give you +1 to the priority turn roll. I mean, that would be a way to encourage unique army building, with the trade-off being that you're then taking suboptimal units. And I think right now.
Yeah, that's what I've said. I think Battle Regiment is too optimal. Yeah.
Yeah.
The composition of Battle Regiment is perfect. I mean.
I really like
Hunters on the turtle's nice, and I think that's what I took at Vault Wars. I took Hunters on the turtle, and there were certainly times where I was like, "Oh, it's kind of nice." I mean, it's helpful to have. There were many more times where I was like, "Why the hell am I not just taking a 1-drop?"
And fishing for that.
That was actually my army list name. Was all right, fine. I won't take a 1-drop because I've always been a proponent for the 1-drop Deepkin list.
I've heard a really cool idea where things you do, like what you were saying, things you do throughout the game influence your priority roll. So, for example, you could have an alternate set of tactics. Instead of taking a battle tactic and scoring victory points, you could take like this tactic that gives you +1 to the priority roll or something instead.
Yeah, instead of victory points. That's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, that would be amazing and encourage actual tactical play, which I think that's kind of a little bit lacking in that avenue.
And it would make it more about the 5-round game instead of just the 1, 2, 3.
Absolutely. I mean, also, what's frustrating too is that people who say that double turn is like a catch-up mechanism, but if the double turn from 1 into 2 is just such a huge advantage, because then not only do you either then retain priority in 3, but if you get reverse doubled, you get to burn an objective. So the double turn from 2 into 3 after having been doubled yourself, that's a catch-up mechanic that you're then punished for taking because you lose out on like an objective in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah.
And so it ends up with a lot of feels bad moments.
Let's not go too far off the deep end here.
That's
topic,
true.
And I'll try to stop making Idoneth puns, I promise.
No, that's actually a good one.
Let's talk about Thralls. So they are the basic battle line unit. They're very useful as a cheap screen, 10 models spread across. They can cover a lot of distance with their 32 well bases, but they're also quite useful in blocks of 30 and also in blocks of 20. They do quite a bit of damage. People use them like that. So they're I think in every list. It's very rare to see an Idoneth list that doesn't have them for some purpose, either as a damage dealer or as like stack all your defensive benefits in wall or just a cheap screen.
Yeah, and the beauty of Thralls, they can do all those things at the same time.
Yeah. They're slow, right? I think without Floodtide, they're not going anywhere. 6-inch move is not good in this game. It is definitely, it's not, Fire Slayer slow, but it's still slow. It's not going anywhere useful.
Yeah, but it's thankfully we live in a world where Deepkin don't need to worry about that because you can basically guaranteed Floodtide. You're gonna be able to run and charge, and possibly a +1 to both those rolls.
Yeah, it's quite useful. They are fragile. They need external buffs in order to not be considered fragile. But at 1 wound, 5-up save, they're one of the easiest things in the game to kill. And that said, though, there's a lot of ways to buff their defenses, right? So you get cover from the Leviadon. You get cover from the Tides. You get Leviadon +1 save, and you get all-out defense. And then you can also stack that with a Mystic Shield if you happen to bring a wizard that can cast a spell. You can bring a 5-up ward from the Shipwreck, or if you have High Tide with the Ritual active, and you can also get a -1 to wound in combat from the Thrallmaster. So they're surprisingly durable when you stack all these things on top of each other. You can actually survive a charge. You're still going to take a lot of damage on the way.
Kind of.
And that's where Morfan comes in and starts reviving models, right?
Yep.
So they're not going to be like Stormcast where, laughs in 15 protectors, right? It's not going to be like that, but they can survive a combat.
They're deceptively strong on defense, and it's the way I put it. If you just dedicate some like light shooting or light melee to them, hoping to clear some of them out, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, no, they will absolutely not worry about that. But the problem that they also come into is, they're durable asterisk for Idoneth. They max out at a 4-up save, so they're at their peak. At their peak durability, as durable as a Grimghast Reaper. It's something where it's great against like higher end stuff with few attacks and low damage. So things like ironically protectors that have a bunch of attacks with like -2 rend but 1 damage. You can put some Thralls in there and still be saving on a 4-up. Mm-hmm. So they're pretty helpful in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Their damage output is nothing to sneeze at either. They're, I think, point for point the best damage dealers in the book. Asterisk with Rend 1, which is questionable value right now. But they're 2 attacks apiece base, and then depending on what they're fighting, they get bonuses. So they get +1 attack, which is if they're fighting something with a wound characteristic of 1. So if you're fighting a lot of ghosts, you get a 50% bonus to your damage, basically, because they go from 2 to 3 attacks. If you're fighting something with a wound characteristic of 3 or more, you get a double damage bonus, because everything gets damage 2 instead of damage 1. So then you can be on 2s and 2s, Rend 1, damage 2. Which is very good for a squad of 10 dudes, even better for a squad of 30 dudes that have 2-inch reach and are striking in 2 ranks.
Oh yeah, they've killed Magmadross. They're good.
And then the Magmadross kills them back with their volcanic blood.
Yeah, don't worry about that part. It's fine. It's I prefer to look at the good things.
Yeah, I've seen him losing Akhelian King to that. I'm like, okay.
So,
oh yeah, I mean, you jazz the king up and then he rolls 17 dice against you. It's like, oh shit, there we go.
What I really like about these guys is that they're versatile. So pretty much almost whatever you're fighting, you're going to get some kind of benefit. Unfortunately, if you're fighting something with 2 wounds, so like Stormcast or Daughters of Cain with their snakes or Hearthguard, they're terrible. Like 2 attacks of 3s and 3s Rend 1 is really bad. Like, oh man, it's bad. And they're also, like, without defensive buffs, if you get a unit in range of the boat and disable it, which we'll talk about soon, if they're not on High Tide with a ritual, they don't have a ward, they die quick. And then Bravery 7, they run away even quicker, which is crazy. So you need Inspiring Presence. You gotta save a command point in case your opponent decides to go all out on your Thralls. Yeah. Because even with all these defensive buffs, if you lose 15, a lot of them are going to run away, which is really awful. Mm-hmm. And in terms of damage output, they really do need bonuses to hit and wound, so you got to bring support heroes. You need Lotann, you need all-out attack, you need these things. And because, like Carl, you've been saying, really don't like playing Hunters of the Heartland, these guys can just get roared, and then they can't get all-out defense or all-out attack, so there's issues that you have to overcome with this unit. And the biggest one is definitely Rend 1. Like, Stormcast just laugh at these guys. We really don't care. 2 wounds, and you only have Rend 1. You're not doing any damage. Like, Liberators tank these guys, which is sad.
Yeah, the classic accompaniment for this is an Eidolon of the Sea, though.
Yes.
That's usually the composition, because that solves all these problems immediately.
Exactly. Yep. It also gives you good anti-magic, which one of the weaknesses a lot of people don't talk about right now with any Horde unit. Idoneth in particular have this problem with the Thralls. Anti-Horde spells really mess this army up, because you can target them from behind screens, and rolling dice equal to unit size and then doing like a 5 or 4 to deal a mortal wound, that's backbreaking for this army. It's really hard to recover after taking one of those. Just losing 15 models like that is crazy. And if you have an Aspect of the Sea, a rerollable Unbind could be the thing that stops them.
Oh, Aspect of the Sea, and you got a Soulrender and Morphan, and all of a sudden you're feeling a little bit better about things.
It's not so bad, yeah. Maybe like if it really becomes a problem, like if people really tech against Night Haunt, then a Knight Incantor can come in and be that Dispel Scroll you need.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot. They can ally Stormcast in.
Can they? They can.
Oh, yes, they can. Oh, yes, they can.
Okay, good.
They absolutely can.
Yeah, they can.
They absolutely can.
Looking at Reavers.
Yeah, I noticed Carl painting up his Celestin Prime suspiciously.
Ignore that. That's not for anything.
Don't worry about that. That's the best army I have now.
So let's look at the other basic battle line unit in the army, the Reavers. They're a little bit faster than the Thralls, which is weird. But okay. 8-inch move. They have pretty much all the same defensive profile as Thralls, but they shoot instead of fighting. And they shoot pretty well. Like, at point for point, they are the best shooting in the book.
Oh, well. They shoot so well.
Yeah. Now, it's only rend 1, so, like, you're going to do 4 to 5 damage to a 3-up save. Like, Liberators are going to laugh at this. You got to bring a lot of these guys to do significant damage. And I think that's where the problem is, right? What I would love is to have a unit of 10 of these guys clear out a screen of 5 Liberators, but that's not enough. You got to bring 20 or even 30 of these guys to a list to be like just 10 isn't worth it.
Well, yeah, it's a bit difficult. I mean, 20 I think is certainly the sweet spot. I think 20 is just a phenomenal amount of these guys to have. 10 is pretty helpful. The Deepkin tend to do pretty well at just sort of almost incidentally clearing screens between these guys, the Sharks, the Turtle. I mean, you have everything that at least I put in most of my Nautilus builds gets to shoot. And so because of that, they're mostly there as sort of Unleash Hell deterrent and as a sort of a secondary screen. You know, if you want to charge the Turtle or charge, my screen, you're going to be eating 20 shots, 2 attacks, 2s and 3s -1 in a phase that you don't get to have your all-out defense. That can actually put some serious chiseling through units that would otherwise be fairly spooky. And it's also a sort of unit where just having it around forces, wounded units to play a little bit more conservatively. If you just have like one pig left who's got a couple wounds, I can just sort of point these at them. They're fast. If the pig charges me to do all out, Unleash Hell. They're very helpful to have, but I do think that you need to have about 20, which does add up because they're 170 points for 10.
Yeah, it does fill a battle line slot, which is nice. So it's not like you're taking another Allopex or something.
Right, you're never really penalized for taking these.
That's about all there is to say about these guys. They'll never win you the game on their own, but they're a nice strategic piece to have.
They roll a bucket of dice.
Yeah. It is also worth noting their max threat range is 26 inches because they can't run and shoot unless it's Flood Tide, of course, right? But yeah, 26 is just short of what you want in this game. Like 30 inches is that key threat range that you want in order to deal with things like long strikes or other 24-inch shooters. And let's look at the last 2 units in the book. The Soulscryer and the Soulrender. So the Soulscryer is a priest, but nobody cares about that because he's never on the table on turn 1 and the game's over by turn 3, so it doesn't matter. His main thing, they have prayers,
Allegedly. They happen against me all the time.
Now, it could get additional value if you need to dispel another player's invocation or something, but it's not relevant now. But
invocation's the thing that sees a lot of play.
Oh man,
Dart as a cane. Dart as a cane.
Fire Slayers with that wall would really mess up Idoneth. I'm just saying.
Well, they'll mess up the Thrall build.
Yep.
I'll completely ignore it in my Nautilus list.
Well, defensively, you just stick it in front of your units and then you just can't get charged.
I'll just shoot you. Fire Slayers have 4-up armor saves when they're fat boys.
Followed by 5-up Warden and a 4-up rally.
On their Magma Dross?
Oh, no, I don't play Magma Dross. I'm not falling for that trap.
Your Hearthguard aren't catching me, man. You got 4-inch move, you're fat little dwarfs.
Try 14, buddy. I got a Battle Mage here. Every time.
He's not making it long. There's no bodyguard on that Battle Mage.
He's at the back of the board. How are you shooting him?
Got Sharks that go 400 inches. I shoot 24.
And then you're
24 plus 18. It's like 42 inch. Yeah.
All right. Enough of the theory hammer. So the Soulscryer deploys himself in reserve along with 2 units, and then he can deploy himself on the table, and then the 2 units in reserve go near him. And that's, I think, the best case scenario that we thought of this was just getting Reavers in range against something super long range like long strikes. You can just drop in on any table edge and be within threat range. What do you think, Carl? How's this guy turned out from our predictions?
Yeah, no, that's kind of his big use. It prevents the alpha strike against the Reavers, and it lets you basically, prevent things like, I don't know, like a battle mage hiding in the back of the table. You can just sort of deep strike him with 20 Reavers.
What a good use of points.
But exactly, that's the thing is that, with that, he's 100, and he spends 150 points. Deepkin is not an army that has a lot of points to go around. You really don't want to take him or take basically 10 more Reavers. And this is kind of the boys over toys thing. There's a lot of toys in Deepkin, but you really got to have the boys. And he's sort of something that, in certain lists, if you're really concerned and you want to have the 20 Reavers, you're worried about board space, and like a Morfan or like a Dom Hain, we've got a bunch of Thralls taking up space, and you worry about Reavers being in range, then sure. But in most cases, you got very few models. You're looking at like 90 to 100 wounds per army. He's not really adding anything to it.
Yeah, and once he's done his trick, he does nothing. So just ignore him. He's never a threat. Yeah, the Soulrender is. We've been talking a little bit about this guy. Didn't feel like he was even worth including a picture for. Apparently, he's also slow, low damage, fragile like the other heroes. He does have the D3 Namarti revive thing, but unless you're going Morfan and really dedicating it to Thralls, it's not really worth using that. Once per model, he can instantly kill a model, which is kind of cool, but maybe
he costs
one day I'll see it.
In points.
Yeah, he's not Lotann. That's the problem.
He costs 5 points more, so.
So
easy choice.
Even if that build becomes popular, I think other armies just do the attrition style better, and Idoneth should focus on what they're good at and not try to become something that they're not.
Absolutely.
But maybe with the right points, it could happen, right? Like if all this stuff changes.
Morfan, you people skip lose him. He's good in Morfan, but yeah, otherwise D3 is not a big number.
Yeah, at least it's not like 2+ revive D3 like so many other abilities are becoming.
Yeah.
Oh god, it reminds me of the Lady of Wines, but we'll discuss that later.
It's
Carl.
okay. You know how many Skaven I'm going to buy for $0.00 because people are going to buy that box?
Yeah.
So many.
Run us through the boat, Carl.
Boot. Alright, this is the best model in Deepkin. You can use it in all kinds of unique and exciting ways. There's really just for the initial defensible terrain that you get to set up in your deployment zone, there's two great ways to do it. The first way is you put it, directly in front of your army with 10 Reavers inside. Then you have 2 units of 10 Thralls forming what is essentially a weird trapezoid. And then your whole army goes in between there. And what that does is it makes you immune to alpha strikes. As in, you literally cannot get to the turtle, sharks, and characters. It's just not mathematically, physically possible. It guarantees it will fail. You can't shoot those units. You can't get past those units. And I guess, if you want, you can charge the boat and kill the Reavers, but the boat is so fat you can't even engage the other stuff. Then you die on the clapback. So that's way number one. Way number two is to sort of put this behind your Thrall screens. And this is what I usually do when I have a unit of 20 Reavers, is I set up the big boat so that it gives my whole unit of 20 Reavers a 5-up ward save. And it's very simple to set up in such a way that even should you charge the Reavers, you can't turn off the boat. And now the Reavers are on like a 3-up or a 2-up save asterisk, maxes out a 4-up and a 5-up ward. So whatever you charge into them may or may not kill them, and then I kill whatever is touching them. So it's just, the boat is excellent in that way, and then being able to put down a second boat, you can put it down behind you to screen out deep strikes, you can put it in front of you to screen out maw crushers or gargants, you can put it wherever you want, and you can even kind of like bring in your ward save with you if you're playing Morfan or Dom Hain, and you're like, well, my Thralls are going to be charging up the board. If you've brought the second boat and you've got the teleport off, you can chuck that boat kind of ahead as like a little beacon, and then run your Thralls and get into combat in front of it and still keep that ward save. It's just such a good faction terrain. It's so perfect thematically, so helpful, and like everything, it has a lot of butts. You can't put it too close to your enemies. It's hard to set it up after you've already moved your models. Remember, you set it up at the end of your first movement phase. So if you're going to throw the boat down, you have to throw it down more than 3 inches away from your own models as well. So again, someone, I'm not saying who, has occasionally screened out his own boat drop because of the way that he's moved. That's just kind of the classic, Deepkin fun experience to have. Is like, man, this would have been great, but I botched this.
I'll pay good photos for that as well, Burgon.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. You know?
So two things I'm going to interrupt you real quick, because I think you mentioned a few things, and I like this series for people who have no idea what this thing does. So I'm just going to mention, you said turning off the boat. How that works is unmounted Idoneth units, if they're wholly within 6 inches of a boat, they get a 5-up ward. So really that's just Namarti, because there's a wound restriction on it. Now it's disabled. That ability to give a ward, it says it's just disabled if any unit without the Idoneth keyword gets within 3 inches of the boat. Not wholly within, just within. So you can just chuck an endless spell between the boat and the Thralls, and boom, that ward is gone. So that's pretty helpful. The other thing is that you mentioned that you set this up in your movement phase, but we should clarify that's the one you get from the artifact. The initial boat is set up at the start of the game in your territory, more than 3 inches from all objectives and terrain. So, if you've seen some of the boards with terrain at major events that I won't mention by name, it's quite sparse on terrain, and you can fit these things pretty easily. But around here, I really like playing with a lot of big terrain, so it can get difficult to fit a boat properly.
Yeah, and it can be, but it's one of those artifacts where some games it won't do much. Some games it'll be cool and helpful, and some games you just win. And that's sort of like kind of the gold standard for artifacts in terms of utility in my mind, is one where not only can I use it to kind of help my army play the way that it wants to play, but every once in a while some of the harder Deepkin matchups like Gargants or things like Maw Crushes, or even Fire Slayers with those fat magma drops that bleed and kill me. I know these boats really punish players for taking big monsters that I don't usually have good answers for in Deepkin beyond, fighting in combat, which you really want to be.
All right, so we have gone through exhaustively, I think, exactly what the Idoneth are trying to do. So let's break it down into kind of like a summary here. So their strengths. Idoneth are a very fast army. Most of the stuff that you care about is flying and 14-inch move, or it's going to be running and charging with a guaranteed 6, and bonuses to run and charge. Because they're flying and they have relatively small footprints on a lot of units, they can just jump over screens. So you have to make sure there's stuff in between when you're screening. Tides of Death buffs are incredibly strong. They get cover turn 1, run and charge, strike first, retreat and charge, and then the rituals on top of that is really powerful buffs, and they're army-wide and they're guaranteed. So there's a lot of consistency there. I would say medium damage. I wouldn't call them a high damage army, right? Like they really struggle killing Gargants. They can't meet the DPS check. But, that's just a weakness that some armies have.
Yeah.
High Tide, a lot of people consider it to be an offensive thing, but it's actually a defensive buff, right? If you think about it, your ability to strike with all of your units before your opponent can attack you is actually a defensive option because it prevents you from taking damage while you do your damage. It's like offensive defense.
Yeah, it's just a capital B buff. I mean, it makes everything better. I can throw my units up without.
In a way, it's their insurance for turn 3.
Yep.
That's what I view it as. If they get doubled into turn 3, otherwise they would just lose instantly on the spot.
Yeah, yep. And the whole army is balanced with that in mind, right? Like it's fragile. Like if you hit them round 1 and 2, they're going to take serious losses. They have other abilities to help offset that, which is why we're making this whole video here, is to help you understand what the Idoneth are trying to do, how they do it, and how to beat it.
Yeah, I mean, another thing too is that in general, it's an army where if you bide your time and wait for them to make a mistake and capitalize on it, they cannot come back.
Yes, if you play carefully, we'll talk about weaknesses in a bit, but one of the weaknesses of Idoneth is that they are predictable. You know what they're going to do because they play based on their tides, because any play they make not based on the tides is very inefficient and very punishable. So either they do what you're expecting them to, or do something you're not expecting, and then you can punish them anyway. They're also a very high accuracy army, right? They might not have like the highest raw damage output, but usually they're on 2s and 2s or 2s and 3s. And because they have a good mix of shooting and melee, that makes them very versatile in terms of damage. You can't just screen them out like you could with Iron Jaws, for example. So run us through the typical game plan, Carl, and if it matches up with the notes we have here.
Yeah, so I mean, always have the Deepkin castle, and this is also kind of for every Deepkin army is mostly going to deploy in this sort of manner, where they're going to either deploy around the Leviadon, or they're going to be 2 wide, and then probably use the 2 shipwrecks to buff big Namarti blocks. It's going to be very compact to start, which is definitely a place where if people aren't thinking carefully, you as Stormcast can punish them with like Annihilator drops or Judicator bombs or Lust and Prime, dropping kind of anything that does like mortal wounds in a radius. If they choose to deploy like that, then you can kind of punish them for it. Otherwise, the deployment is mostly set up so that I can either threaten any objective on the table with my really fast movement, or I can shoot anywhere I need to shoot. If I'm concerned that you might have a character like, like if they think a Parataunt is like left, without a bodyguard or something that will prevent me from shooting it to death, I'm going to 100% spend the first turn trying to shoot synergy pieces or things that I think will stop me from getting to the juicy targets as quickly as possible. I mean, if I see raptors on the table, they're going to be eating as much shooting as I can possibly put into them, just almost automatically.
Right.
And then turn 1, it depends on if you're reversing the tides or not. I've been big on reversing the tides recently, so on turn 1, I usually will try and go second, and then I will hurl everything up the table extremely quickly, because I want you to play defensively, and I want to get the double turn. Double turning into high tide is one of those feels bad moments that everyone who plays against Deepkin has to experience at least a dozen times before I feel, as though you've learned a lesson about how Age of Sigmar priority is balanced. Because it's just game winning. I mean, I don't think I have ever lost a game where I've doubled into high tide, because it's just such a ridiculously punishing mechanic to have the first priority with that mechanic active. So I'll try and do that. If I don't get it, then that is a turn where I'm going to try and then get in combat. Although if it's the bottom of the turn and I'm worried that I won't be able to actually kill my targets, then I might be slightly cagier than I otherwise would be. But in general, the first turn or two in an army that doesn't have high tide will be spent trying to remove synergy pieces through either shooting or specific combats chosen by the Deepkin player. Specifically, you'll see the king get very aggressive on turn 2 because he has that pocket high tide, which means that he'll likely try and engage with 1 or 2 high output units, knowing that he'll be safe on the next turn because of the defensive buff of high tide, while allowing the king to pop the Lord of the Tides to give his army essentially a quote-unquote early high tide. So that's just generally how every game against Deepkin will go. It sounds pretty straightforward. There's a lot of nuance to it and a lot of things that you can do to stop them from doing these sorts of things. Otherwise, I think the game plan that's out there is pretty much perfect. I'm not really sure what this ebb tide is, because games don't really go past 3 turns.
I've heard rumors that there is a turn after round 3, but I haven't seen it yet in years.
It only ever comes up when they face Gardens.
Yeah. Then you just try to lose because you've done 30 wounds to the Gatebreaker and it kills your turtle.
No, and they want you to retreat because they're scoring anyway.
I mean, this Deepkin's also an army where I am more than happy to go down on points turn 2. I mean, I'll go down, I don't even mind. You can have all the objectives you want, because if I think I can get in a position where I'll just table you or otherwise completely ruin your army, losing out on 1 or 2 points is not a big deal. And that's another thing too, where if you're going to put a unit on an objective away from everything else and it's a slower unit, I'll let you sit there until I've killed everything else, and then I'll come and get that unit. So make sure that when you're sort of sitting on objectives against Deepkin, that you're doing so with units that you don't need in the main fight, or that you're able to control where the main fight happens. Because otherwise, I'll just, for example, in Vault Wars, I'll let you sit, 10 Hearthguard Berserkers and a Rune Sun on that objective and score 2 points a turn, because now you're playing 1,400 points against my 2,000 points. So that's sort of how deep can go.
Yeah, you need multiple waves of things to eat attacks just in case you get doubled by the Deepkin. You need that redundancy, and it's going to catch people off guard. The problem, absolutely, I think, is when people pick up on that and they have that redundancy, then Deepkin are okay.
Yeah, or if I whiff, Yeah, because I've only got so many attacks.
Giving up total board control round 1 for that defensive deployment, not having the range needed for Thralls until turn 2, and then not having that really powerful defensive high tide on turn 3 to guarantee, you secure your position round 2 and then guarantee it round 3. And so it's that 1-2 kind of riskiness that really shakes things up.
I will say that if you play overly aggressively on turn 1 because you think the Deepkin player is going to be, very passive, you will get immediately murdered by a king, because they do carry that pocket high tide aura
on their turn. So I want to keep clarifying that, because I know some people are going to get that wrong.
Yep, always on their own turn. But Deepkin are will almost without exception take the second turn if possible. Go second in the battle round.
Yeah.
Because I want you to say, well, I can just spread out and then that way that lets me asymmetrically engage you with my faster movement, and the knowledge that even if I'm trying to take, if I'm required to engage like a Gargant with multiple units, I have the High Tide to let me activate them before the Gargant can kill whatever it's fighting.
Yeah. Going Battle Regiment 1-drop yourself and forcing the Idoneth to go first is also a really big deal. Like forcing it to come down to a roll-off is good, because if they get the first turn, they will force you to go first every time, like if they get the 1-drop. So take that away from them, right? You want the 1-drop if you know you're going to be facing a lot of Idoneth armies.
It's age of priority.
Let's take a look at the weaknesses and limitations. And if I say this, this is my list of things that I can see, but if any of these are incorrect, just let me know. So first off, like I said before, the army playstyle is predictable because it's based on the Tides of Death, right? You're going to have that defensive style turn 1 because of how boat deployment works and how the shooting protections work. You want a defensive castle. Everything but the Namarti are weak to mortal wounds, and Namarti are still weak to mortal wounds because they don't always have a 5-up board, right? It's if they're near a boat and the boat isn't disabled, or if it's high tide and they have the ritual active. So they can still just die in droves. The faster units like Allopexes and Guard, yeah, they're going to do some good melee damage, but then you just kill them on the counterattack. They're fragile. It doesn't take much to kill them. It's a situation where even like better punchy screens can kill your hammers. They're that fragile. They have good shooting damage, right? Like we've been talking about, but ultimately you still need the melee to win the games. You can't just win with an all-shooting Idoneth army. It's not viable.
Well, we'll see when Nighthaunt and Daughters of King come out.
I think you'll lean more into shooting, but I don't think all shooting is the way to go. I don't think it'll win.
I consider Sharks shooting.
They're a hybrid unit. Like you can't win off just Sharks and Reavers, I don't think.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is that the Deepkin are kind of interesting because they do have those hybrid units. I mean, the Turtle's shooting. Turtle's got 2 Sharks on his back. Got almost a full unit of Reavers hanging out on his back right there. I mean, there's a lot of Deepkin units can contribute in multiple phases of the turn, which I think is a huge strength of the army. They don't have just like a unit that does one necessarily thing.
Yeah, Stormcast have a lot of that going on too. Hybrid units are very useful strategically because pure shooting units, if you just shoot your opponent and the objective is just open, they just walk back onto it, and then you're shooting again and they walk back onto it. Like you might be killing units, but you're losing the game. Whereas hybrid units like Dracoths, Storm Drakes, Allopexes, these units can shoot and then charge in to finish things off, not only wiping the unit out but also taking the space that was being occupied previously. But when you do that as Idoneth, other units just walk over and kill your hammers.
Yeah, unlike dragons, our saves are not good, and we don't have all the crazy shenanigans you guys do. Magic hurts us,
Yep. Mostly Rend 1 attacks, pretty much across the board, aside from the King and the Turtle and Nautilus, and very few mortal wound sources. I think this was overlooked when people initially looked at the book, because everybody's so hyped up about Thrall blocks and how high you can stack those numbers, but what you don't see what's missing usually, right? Like you can't see something that's not there, and not having a lot of mortal wounds is a big deal in this game right now.
Oh yeah.
So
outside of the offensive eels and the Horn Deep Mare doing D3, I don't think there's much going on.
No, it's tough. Maw Crushes.
It's always been a big Deepkin.
You just can't kill Maw Crushes. You ignore them, you kill everything else in the army, and you hope they don't kill you fast enough. They have very expensive support pieces, right? Like a little Leviadon's not like it's crazy expensive, but the King is a lot less expensive, but still feels pricey in this kind of list. Eidolon.
King is expensive.
Yeah, all these things are pricey, and when you take these pieces, which you feel like you need, it leaves less room for the hammer units, like you were saying, the boys and the toys. That's a pretty good phrase and encapsulates that idea pretty well. Idoneth have very good shooting protection, but anything that's ranged and not shooting is really, really good, right? Like spells, abilities, anything that does mortal wounds in an area really messes up Idoneth because they're not a high wound army. Their heroes are 5 wounds apiece, so sometimes taking 2d3 just kills a support hero, and then you don't get your boat, and that sucks.
That's where the 5 awards kind of help. I think.
Yeah, the heroes are a bit tanky, but again, you can easily get rid of them all. It's just one of those things where it's just a castle busting.
Yep.
If you have the ability to bust a castle, you'll just ruin Deepkin unless they can adapt. Even then, you'll still be able to do a ton of damage.
Yep, because if they don't deploy in a castle, it gets much worse for them. Like it's not a good scenario either way.
Yeah, I actually, because I'm a lunatic, I have like sort of pre-saved on my phone. I usually do a 1-drop, so I have set up multiple deployment scenarios for different types of armies. So when I'm going to play someone like Morgana, whom I know is going to deep strike, I can just sort of look at my phone and be like, oh yeah, I've already measured all this out. This is how to do it to properly zone them out. And I think that's something like Deepkin really rewards, because you need to be able to adapt your deployment to all sorts of different army compositions, or else you're just going to get chewed up.
Yeah, the every mistake is punished hard in a Deepkin army. And in other armies, not so much, like Stormcast with good saves, we can get through it. Other armies can revive stuff and get through it, or have bodyguards to protect heroes. Idoneth have none of that. They just get punished.
Yeah.
No 4-up rally for us.
Yeah. Well, not anymore. Not after the errata.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. Yeah, that was definitely the best use of that character.
A lot of their attacks are 1-inch range, right? Like Allopexes, Leviadons, Eels, they're all 1-inch range. Thralls are 2, but whatever. They're a huge unit, so they're not going to get everything in range every time. So there's limitations there in terms of how you actually fight. And I didn't list it on here, but they don't have any bonuses to pile-in distance. So when you combine that with low melee weapon range, there's very fixed distances that they can go in the combat phase. And it's actually a lot easier to screen out an army like that than something like Sisters of Slaughter piling in 6 inches and then fighting twice. Like, that's a crazy amount of distance they can cover. But it's all predictable. You know exactly how far these units can go in combat, and you can play around it. And I think that's a big deal against Idoneth. Most of the lists run by Idoneth are all hammers and no anvils. I don't see a lot of players right now taking min-size units of 10 Thralls. I think it's going to get more popular because it's like that's how you beat
a lot of
melee
players
alpha
take
strikes.
10 Thralls.
Okay, that's good.
Most players will take that, and this usually you take 2x10 to do that kind of that pyramid boat scheme that I was talking about, to sort of ensure that you can block off both your flanks. The 10 Thralls are the big question that people have is sort of right now. The debate is whether or not you do a unit of 20 Reavers to act as your screen versus just sort of going more in on the Thralls. Because the Thralls, the unit of 10, they get in trouble with chip damage from battle shock. They get in trouble with being killed by just sort of basic infantry.
Yeah, light shooting is a problem for them.
Exactly, and the points do add up. So if you have the Reavers, then you can shut off the shooting phase in the first turn with the ritual, and now your army has a much larger threat range. It's kind of it may be a really expensive screen. It may not be the most perfectly divided up screen, but the output and the points efficiency it offers is something that Thralls can kind of struggle with in certain builds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're bringing 10 Thralls, their purpose is to just die, whereas 20 Reavers have a lot more value.
Yeah.
If the unit's just going to die, well, it can do something in addition to that.
Exactly.
Now, like you said, there's no, you can't run a whole list with stuff like that. The more you add like that, it means less damaging units like Allopexes, and that's a struggle. Idoneth have poor casting and unbinding unless you bring the Eidolon of the Storm, which is an expensive support piece, which, as we talked about before, you can't bring many of those because you need a lot of other stuff. So it's
Eidolon of the Sea.
Sea, sorry, not Storm. Yeah, it's a useful piece, but it's really hard to run Eidolon of the Sea and a turtle. Both of those things are like 900 points together. It's a lot. Yeah. It doesn't leave a lot of room.
No, you kind of full send into that composition with Emerald Lifeswarm and stuff, and then you see how it goes. I've never run that list. People have had some success with it. I mean, it's just a problem.
The best list into dragons is what I've heard. Like the Morphan, that's the Namarti spam has actually beat a dragons list. But
yeah, the Namarti spam can be extremely good. The Namarti spam can be good.
Out of curiosity, how? Because the dragons ignore spells on a 4-up, so how do you get through that to a 2?
No, you don't cast on the dragons. The Thralls just mulch stuff. I mean,
just mulch them. The dragons don't have the output to get past 5-up wards and a save stack Namarti that's always going to be on a 4-up.
I can see an all dragons list having trouble with it, but not like dragons with crossbows, for example.
Crossbows. Nobody's running crossbows yet.
They should be.
They will.
Yeah. They're running the Stormdrake Guard with long strikes because that's the most standard.
Is that the crossbows, the deep can just sort of fold to it. You have a 4
adjudicated crossbows. Yeah, I guess. Yeah,
you can do terrible into that. You just shoot me to death.
Yep, and the Allopexes can't counter shoot like you could with long strikes, which are really fragile. Like doing 30 wounds is really hard to do.
Yeah, it's a lot harder. But the other flip side, though, is that then I can also basically be within 12 inches, so I can bring multiple things to bear. And that's kind of the only sort of counterplay Deep can have against that, is to make you be close to them in order to shoot them.
Yeah.
Or just
you have to be super aggressive with shooting units, is what I've noticed. But actually, if I'm using crossbows with 18-inch range, I don't mind being within 12. Sure, if you come near me, I'll shoot you once and die on an unleash hell. Who cares?
Frankly, you're probably going to be about 15 away anyway, because a 15 crossbow unit has such a big footprint. You're going to have to be more. You have to be closer than 18, right?
Basically, yeah.
And you just scions in screens.
Yep.
I think the most efficient this is not a high damage army, and part of that is because you don't have efficient damage outside of Thralls and Reavers. So you need them to deal with horde units. Like once we transition into like 100 ghosts with a 4-up ethereal, 5-up ward, like Idoneth are really going to struggle against that. You're going to have to tech in more Thralls, more Reavers, bring more efficient damage, and that leaves even less room for support pieces.
It has to be just Reavers. The Thralls get just crushed.
Yeah, they die too quickly. Yep. So I think anything on there look off to you, or does it all sound right?
No, I mean it's pretty straightforward. I mean Deepkin are very much, if you hit them, they die. So it's kind of tough to hit them, but if you can, you'll get them. And I think Stormcast are just extremely well equipped to deal with them. The dragons are faster than anything Deepkin have. You've got good armor saves, you've got healing, you've got magic, you've got ability to kind of bubble out mortal wound auras. Anything that debuffs Deepkin is extremely good because you only hit on 3s, you don't hit on 2s natively. So if you have a -1 to hit, I mean that's a big debuff. You're only going to ever see 2 or 3 real hammer units. You got the ability to protect your synergy pieces by keeping them in the sky. You got the ability to charge us and dictate combats with annihilators dropping from the heavens or dropping raptors wherever you want. I mean, Deepkin are very well countered by Stormcast. The one asterisk there is that Deepkin will also immediately possibly win the game if the Stormcast player messes up, or even if
it's a very tight game. Like you cannot afford mistakes. Play has to be tight, and obviously a single bad dice roll in saves or attacks can really swing the game. But
it can be tough.
Yeah, like there are some things Deepkin will struggle against. Like if you pop like four Stormcast Guard and Guardus behind them, that's not something Deepkin can. Yeah,
or
that's not something.
I mean,
it's not something Deepkin can deal with very easily. It's very tough.
Yeah, and that's just the thing is that Stormcast turtling up and exploding out, while doing what you have, while having the ability to kind of kill the synergy pieces. I mean, there's no coming back from it. We don't have that sort of ability to bounce back. If I lose,
I will say, yeah. I will say though, like Deepkin are like long strikes are probably one of our most popular units. Like everybody likes them.
Prey on that. Don't.
Yeah. So Deepkin is the anti-long strike army. Like, and it's kind of weird because I talk about this, and this is sort of like an odd segue kind of thing. It's okay. We have the tools. We can switch from long strikes to either skybow adjudicators or crossbow adjudicators. Paul and I think prefer crossbow adjudicators because they're so good in other matchups too. I think long strikes were such a popular pick because of how popular Gargants are in the meta, and I think because of this and having to switch our primary shooting unit, our Gargant matchup will get slightly weaker.
It depends on what melee hammer you bring, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair.
Crossbows and dragons will do fine into Gargants.
Yeah, I think that should be okay. Yeah.
All right, so
it's just the Raptor stocks have dropped quite substantially.
Well, look, I've been saying
mulch on Raptor.
I've been saying for at least 3 months now that we are in a crossbow meta, and nobody else seems to have caught on to that. So I'm just waiting for everybody else. I'm over here in a different meta game, just waiting for everybody to catch up.
Oh, I mean, I don't know, man. Those Kragnos Garg lists get outrageous without Rend.
Yeah, but Kragnos is going to get checked hard by what's coming out. You'll see.
Probably.
Oh, it's so nasty.
Like, how does Kragnos do against Nighthawk? He just bounces off, doesn't he?
He doesn't. He doesn't do.
I mean,
he doesn't do anything. Like, okay,
Nighthawk.
you have -3 Rend. Who cares? I have a 4-up save. Okay.
Yeah.
It's rough.
I mean, that's just it's interesting because then that list can change and still be extremely good though. You just staple Kragnos into most destruction lists and they do fine. So
Bone Splitters get stonks. I'll say that. Yeah.
Well, crossbows blitz through Bone Splitters.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's move on to. We've summarized the strengths and weaknesses. We talked about what Idoneth are doing. We talked about their weaknesses and limitations. Morgana, take this next section away. If you had to describe how to counter Idoneth in one phrase, what would you say?
Always keep massive aggression. massive amounts of aggression. Now, obviously, Carl did talk about reversing tides of death, but as a Stormcast player, let's assume a typical Idoneth player is going through your normal tide, so low tide, flood tide, high tide. You have to be able to cripple this army in 2 turns. Anything you do on turn 3, unless you're running one of those like mega castle builds where like you take a Karazai and you buff it up to all hell with all kinds of save stacking with Gardas, or you take 4 Stormdrake Guard, Lord Castellan Gardas, you will not survive any offensive moves on turn 3. Only shooting moves. So aim to do all of your stuff that you need to do in the first 2 turns. Deepkin, like Carl said, like to play Battle Regiment, and they like to fish for the double turn. Shush. Too many fish puns. But so Carl typically likes to give me the first turn in order to try and double me. You have to maximize your damage on this turn. Now, this can be with fast units like Stormdrake Guard, Annihilators, Crossbows, and it can be all 3. And it should be all 3. You should be trying to remove as many of their key pieces as possible in that first turn. Watch out for the second turn, because this is when Ident units like to run and charge. And this is when someone like Carl, for instance, will take his Sharks and his Akhelian King, pop a CP for 20-inch moves, and then with a +1/+2 run or some crazy crap like that, just like get your support heroes like the Imperator and the Relictor. And this has happened to me a couple of times, or even your shooting units. So this match really just becomes about taking out their key pieces and making efficient trades. And as long as you do that, I think you'll be fine.
Does that sound about right? Yeah.
That's absolutely correct.
All right, so how to counter Idoneth. Like I said, they're predictable, and you can use that to your advantage. They want to fight you on rounds 2 and 3. Don't let them do that. Just max aggression. Fight them on round 1. Their thralls might seem durable because they're save stacking and got the ward and all that stuff. Disable the boat, disable the thralls with a roar, and just kill them. They're not that tough. They're still elves at the end of the day. It's a tough castle deployment because, turn 1 has the low tide, which is army-wide cover, and Forgotten Rituals and Forgotten Nightmares in the ritual. It makes it really hard to shoot what you want to shoot. Just shoot everything. Kill everything on the board. Take options away from the Idoneth player. They are a fragile elite army, and everything you kill has value, even if it's just 10 thralls. That will allow you to charge in with your key hammer unit. Right? Everything you kill is a good thing to kill. There's almost no bad targets. There's some targets are a little better, like if you can shoot an Allopex instead of 10 thralls, do it. But in general, kill what you can. Using melee units and short-range shooting, you can take down screens and then charge in on the flank, like I said. Keep your key units as far back as possible. Like if you're running something like long strikes, try to keep it out of range of the Reavers. You can't keep them out of range of Allopexes, but you can out of Reavers, right? They have a max 26. On Flood Tide, they can move an extra 6. So you can measure these things out and just not be in range of the Reavers. Now,
just keep the Rappers in the sky.
Yeah. I mean, Stormcast don't want to do that because we're greedy and we want to Thunderstrike volley you, but that's an option.
It's also a trap, though, because, as soon as you drop the Reavers down, they're going to drop down, probably kill some Thralls if you do it early, and then I'm going to try and kill them very quickly. If you keep them in the sky for a little bit, until you've whittled down my screens, you've got some space built up, then drop them, and you can probably shoot a higher value target.
Yeah, that's why multiple shooting units are really useful in a lot of matchups, this one in particular, because you can hold back threat. Because Idoneth aren't particularly tanky, you don't have to go max damage, you don't have to drop in 15 crossbows and double tap right away. You can, if you're running, for example, 3x5 crossbows, it gives you a lot more tactical flexibility. You can keep more threats in reserve, wait for the Idoneth player to overextend in order to kill you, because they have to, because they just can't take shooting all game long. And once they do, you like Carl said, clap back. Now with Idoneth, they're so fast, just assume, like with Ironjaws, you can't stop them from charging. But what you can do is put your disposable screens in the way, force them to spend time shooting them and fighting them. The longer you can do that, the better, because they really don't want to be fighting useless units. They want to kill your hammers and they want to kill your support pieces. And if any of that doesn't make sense, I recommend looking at Stormkeep episode number 9. We talk about the concept of hammers, anvils, counterattacks, riposts. It's a very good video. I recommend you guys check it out. All right, I didn't figure it out. That's my bad. Deepkin shooting is only Rend 1. There's no way to get Rend 2 shooting in that army. So 3-up save screens are really good because they're durable against that kind of lighter shooting that they do. It's not like getting shot by long strikes. It's more like getting shot by, I don't know, like Sylvaneth. It's okay. It's not great. 3-up save units can typically survive against that. And when your screen survives, that means you don't get charged, which is really important against Idoneth. And like Morganthu said, try to maximize your damage for round 1 and 2. You have to do as much damage as possible to limit the amount of damage that you're going to be taking on round 3. And it is possible to survive sometimes. Like if you do enough damage rounds 1 and 2, it's possible that the Idoneth player won't have enough damage left over to deal a killing blow. And that's really the goal. Like you can't wipe out the army in 3 turns, but you could cripple them so that when they go for their one-hit kill, it's not gonna work. The way I like to visualize Idoneth is like, picture a guy like fencing. I use fencing examples very often, but picture a guy just parrying for like 2 minutes straight. And when he parries, he lunges and tries to go for the throat. That's kind of what Idoneth are trying to do, except instead of a rapier, this guy's got a broadsword, and he's just going to try to cleave across your whole army with a high tide.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you chip
now,
away
obviously,
at it...
like... Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, the more you chip away at it, the weaker that attack comes. And you know it's coming, because they are predictable. They're going to try to do this. If they don't do it, it's going to be rough for them.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Even if they reverse the tides, you should they're pretty, like, I guess the word is they telegraph their moves, or is that the term? In
yeah,
boxing?
I mean you're gonna see what's coming.
You see it coming from a mile away. You know they're going for a round 2 high tide to reduce their impact in the second turn. But guess what? That means they don't have that shooting protection turn 1. That means you can still have more of an impact than you initially thought. That enables things like turn 1 Thunderbolt volleys become more impactful, because then you'll have the units in range, and you can keep your shooting units back, because now you know he can't reach out to you as fast with the run and charge next turn. So yes, so they're very telegraphed with their tides of death. So understanding those and understanding what the Idoneth player is trying to do in the next turn and the turn after will be extremely critical in winning this matchup.
It does take a lot of practice. Knowing what to do against a regular Tide of Death and then knowing what to do against a high tide are very different skill sets, very different knowledge required. And you just need reps. Do a lot of practice games with a competent player who can play both styles, and you'll find yourself getting better and better. You'll find the small gaps in your deployment, the small mistakes in your movements that are preventing you from doing the most damage you can on those first 2 turns. And then you'll have to learn it all over again for high tide reversed, which is it just a lot of games needed.
Yeah, this is one of those armies that really punishes really bad movement and positioning. Like it's not like Iron Jaws where they're just charging you, and if you don't have screens, you lose. This is an army where they're not only charging your screens, they're piling in past your screens. And if you leave a space for the Akhelian King to pile in and touch 3 units, well, that Akhelian King now has 7 attacks with the polearm.
Oh yeah.
So
and they're
those are all things you need to watch out.
It's a very specific example you just laid.
Yes, because it's happened to me.
Yeah, the
exact scenario. Yeah, so you need to be careful about things like that.
And like I mentioned, about 2 hours ago in this podcast, losing models from a unit also loses board space. So if you have, for example, 5 Liberators as a screen, a Shark might shoot 2 of them down, and that might not kill the unit, but it could open up enough room for that Shark to charge past the screen into something that matters, or the King, or land all kinds of nasty stuff where you don't want it. So you have to be very careful. For this reason, like I said, Stormstrike Chariots are really good. They have 12 wounds on a 3-up save. Idoneth are not shooting that down anytime soon. Speaking of which, general tips. So, like I said, don't let them sit back and wait for a round 3 kill. Force them to fight you on round 1 and 2. Do max damage like Murgok suggested. Gotta watch out for that reverse tides. Like I was saying, you have to practice against regular tides of death, and then you have to practice against high tides on round 2. It's a completely different play style. You can pretty much predict the list that's going to run it, because you can see, Tidecaster's the general. It's got that command trait. Okay, he's probably going to high tide. They might not. That's one of the powers of this army, is that they don't have to reverse tide. They might psych you out and think you will. They're going to do that. Leviadon is a major defensive boost, and if you can take it down early, it gets rid of the +1 save buff across the rest of the army. It's very hard to do that, right? It's almost not worth it a lot of times, because it's going to be in the center of the army behind screens. You're going to have to kill the screens and then charge in units, and it's not easy to kill. 16 wounds on a 2-up really ignores a lot of damage.
Just kill everything else.
Yeah, sometimes it's a lot easier.
To drop the Annihilators in and try and make the trade, then absolutely it's an amazing trade to get.
Oh yeah, Annihilators with the impact mortal wounds can take the impact mortal wound. Yeah, they will at least take the turtle down to that 3-up save to where it becomes more killable, I guess.
Yeah. So that'd be like the one quick trade. I think that dragons are a bit of a question mark, especially if they can, depending on how good the turtle is. Just because it's a monster, so every 6 to hit with the jaws is 6 mortal wounds.
I mean, I think that comes down to, can I delete the thralls with something else before the dragons hit you with the breath and then charge in? Basically,
right. If you can breathe on the turtle, it's great. It's got no ward save, so just mortal wounded to death.
If you can drop a Gardas in range as well, that's really useful.
Oh yeah.
Most Idoneth units are 4-up saves, or they're 5-up saves with a 5-up ward. This is not a good defensive stat line for Age of Sigmar. They're not a high wound army, right? Like Ironjaws have that 4-up save across their pigs, but they're still 5 or 6 wounds apiece. Like they're a lot harder to kill than Idoneth are. High rend attacks are really good against Allopexes and Guard because they don't have wards, and 4-up saves just get cut through by rend 2. I would focus on killing Namarti with high volume attacks like crossbows. Anti-horde spells are really strong against them. Yep. Roar is very good against the Allopexes, Leviadons, and Thralls in particular, because they're going to be using all-out defense in order to try to survive, and they won't be in Hunters of the Heartland usually because Idoneth really prefer playing Battle Regiment. Like I was saying before, most of their melee attacks are only 1 inch, no bonus to pile-in distance, so you can actually precisely measure their max threat range, leave units right in range in order to riposte as soon as they're done attacking. You just counter pile in and do damage immediately, and it's going to be devastating damage because they're a fragile army. They have poor CP efficiency, so smaller units like Allopexes are not going to get all-out attack. Right, they're just not going to bother giving them all-out attack on a one-model unit, which means -1 hit effects are very good against that.
The thing to mention here is so Karl, for instance, will run an Akhelian King, and it's got that aura that is pretty excellent, but that only affects Akhelian units. So the sharks are, I think, for the most part, unaffected by it.
They are
no, sharks are Akhelian. It will affect.
Sharks are Akhelian. Oh yeah.
Yep. So it does not affect shooting. It affects melee.
Right.
So the guys on the back of the sharks and on twos, the sharks themselves do not get the bonus from the king.
But it'll determine how far he can spread his castle. Either he has to be very tight-knit around the king, or otherwise if he spreads his sharks too wide, they lose out on a lot of efficiency.
Lotann, too, is a big efficiency thing in this army. So if you can somehow snipe him, reducing them from 2s to 3s is a big deal. Or if you can go even further and give them a -1 wound buff, that's a 25% reduction in their damage, which is huge. You can disable the Shipwreck by putting any unit that doesn't have the Idoneth keyword within 3 inches of it. That's there's a lot of units in the game that don't have the Idoneth keyword, I believe. So if you can, try to just jump something over it, disable the 5-up board, and then kill the Thralls.
It's hilarious. I've seen an IDK player do this with an allied Stormdrake Guard unit.
Oh, they disabled their own boat?
Wasn't me.
It wasn't you, Karl, but it was... He thought it meant non-friendly units. I said no, it's any unit that doesn't have the IDK keyword. So if they allied in a Gotrek or like a Stormdrake Guard and it's near their boat, it's going to disable it.
Gosh, I hope nobody does that. That's just embarrassing.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
All right, so to round out the video, let's talk about some good Stormcast units.
I have to go, but
Okay.
I think this is a good time for me to dip out because I think I've said all that I needed to say, and I'll let you guys who are experts in the Stormcast take away the Stormcast bit.
Sounds good, Karl. Thanks for coming on today.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
All right, so good Stormcast units to have in your army when you're fighting Idoneth Deepkin. First off, Liberators. They're reliable screen, 10 wounds on a 3-up save for 115 points. You can survive getting shot even by 2 Allopexes if you're lucky. 20 Reavers, if you use all out defense, you're going to survive against those things. And you can put them in Hunters of the Heartland, so you can avoid a Metamorphous King or a Leviadon coming in and stomping you, which is really handy. Vindictors, like Liberators, 3-up save, you can stack it to a 2-up. You can do some mortal wounds, which is always useful. But like we always talk about, 5 is just not worth it. You want to bring a block of 15, because when you have 15 Vindictors on a 2-up save, or with ignoring Rend 2, they can actually survive a high tide, I think. Maybe that's too presumptuous, but man, that is tough to shift.
Yes, I think it is absolutely tough to shift.
And then if you're Hollowed Knights, they're fighting on death and then exploding with Blaze of Glory and probably killing a shark on their way down. It's rough. That's
the only real thing that will damage them is the Akhelian King at that point. And the sharks will maybe kill 2 or 3 Vindictors at most.
Yeah. Well, if you're ignoring Rend 2, even the King is you're saving on 2s against him. It's still rough.
Yeah, it's pretty rough, yeah.
Judicators with Boltstorm crossbows are the Stormcast's highest damage shooting, even against 3-up saves. So imagine how gross they are against 5-up saves. They just get even better than all of our other shooting. 18-inch range is not really an issue because Idoneth shut off shooting past 12 inches, so you're going to want to be close with your shooting anyway. You're going to be aggressive. Crossbows are great at that. They don't have Rend or Mortal Wounds, so they're going to do approximately 0 damage to a Leviadon. Just shoot everything else instead. Not a big deal.
I mean, you're not using shooting to get to a Leviadon ever. Like a Leviadon, you need to bring it down with something like a Fulminator or an Annihilator or a Stormbreak Guard. Getting to a Leviadon via purely shooting is going to be close to impossible against a good Idoneth Deepkin player.
Or just charge it to death with chariots.
Oh, yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is you'll have to get up close and personal against the Leviadon.
Now, I like these guys better than Vanguard Raptors in a lot of matchups because their higher model count gives them more wounds, and they are, a lower cost overall than the expensive Vanguard Raptor and Liberator package. I think I like having 30 wounds on a 4-up save more than I like having 12 wounds on a 4-up save.
Yeah, or even 20 wounds. Like even a unit of 10 crossbows with a slightly smaller footprint is a good pick into Deepkin.
For sure, yeah. The Knight Judicator is also a nice supporting shooting unit. Rend 3 completely cuts through the Allopex save. It really puts a hurt on the King. It really helps take down the Leviadon with its Rend 3. Now, it's not enough damage on its own to kill anything if you just bring one Knight Judicator, but if you bring multiple Knight Judicators, or if you bring them in addition to your other shooting, they can be the last few points of damage that you need to reliably kill something, because they're going to be on 2s and 2s, Rend 3, which is huge.
I mean, the best part about them is that orbital cannon, because it completely gets past the shooting protection that Idoneth Deepkin have. So if you have 4 or 5 of these things and you unleash them into the middle of the IDK castle, well, that's suddenly maybe all of his support heroes dead turn 1.
Yep. Or like this guy alongside Celestin Prime and a Knight Vexillor, that's 3d3, and you still have other stuff to do with those units. Yeah, it's a useful ability. The Lord Castellant is very useful against Idoneth because he has a guaranteed +1 to save. You don't have to roll a dice like with a spell or a prayer. It's just pick a unit, +1 save, and it stacks with all of our other abilities that stack saves. And Idoneth with their low rend really struggle with that concept. Like if you have a Vindictor block with a 2-up ignoring rend 2, which is possible with a Lord Castellant, they're not getting through that. That's really tough for them. Any wizard with the Master of Magic command trait that can help you get Mystic Shield or Thundershock. We talked about how hard of a time they have getting through armor, and any wound debuffs are also very useful because they work on both. Thundershock works on both melee and shooting. So suddenly you could have sharks on trying to wound you on 4s with their harpoons, which is not fun for the Idoneth player.
Yeah, not at all.
Celestin Prime, mortal wounds every turn, ignores Forgotten Nightmares. That's great. Deploys from reserve any auto charges, which is like the Idoneth's worst nightmare because they want to control your movement and control combat. This Celestin Prime fights anywhere, anytime, guaranteed. Yeah. Rend 3 is like a turtle cracker. It's just gonna. Yes. Oh man, that's rough. And he's pretty durable, right? So even if you get stuck in a combat with like 1 or 2 units, even if they fight first on a 3-up save, which you can all out defense, to 2-up, and then a 4-up ward, he's tanky. He can survive it and then punch back at full strength.
Oh, absolutely. Like in my matchups against Carl, for instance, I'll usually pop him down turn 2 because I think having utility for him over 4 turns is better than him having 2 extra attacks over the last 2 turns or 3 turns. And I'll pop him in at turn 2, and turn 3, if I know he might get targeted by a bunch of things, I'll pop Finest Hour on him, and then that basically makes him unkillable with the mixture of all-out defense and his 4-up ward too.
Oh yeah, and then you're tying down multiple units while you're on a 2-up save. Yeah, it's pretty great.
Pretty good. Yep.
Knight Incantor, Void Storm Scroll is always useful. It's getting more useful as they release more books that have like the one spell you want to unbind, like a Mind Razor, or even just a Mystic Shield, right? Like it's always useful. Their signature spell is okay. Reducing charge rolls by 1 is fine. It's hard to use because it's a pulse and not an aura, but it is what it is. Gardas, Idoneth are not a high damage army. So if you can increase your effective wounds by adding Gardas, like 50% effective wounds across the army, insane. It takes your army from like Idoneth could kill you to Idoneth are really going to struggle to do any damage. It's really rough for them.
Idoneth have a really bad matchup into Nurgle for this exact reason, because Nurgle are basically like 4-up saves with 5-up boards across the whole army, and sometimes Idoneth just bounce off that army. They have nothing. They can only use their movement to dance around the battlefield. And try to move block Nurgle from doing anything.
And because Idoneth have to get into melee to deal that finishing blow, like we've talked about so many times, that means they're going to get hit back. Like High Tide is 1 turn. If you don't deal crippling damage on that turn, you're going to get hit back and you're going to die. So increasing, like high defense in general is really good against Idoneth. few more units here. We've got the Stormdrake Guard. We talked about how useful they are. Huge threat range. The breath attack, mortal wounds, just murder things. Rend 2 attacks on the lances on the charge, just murder things. You can double tap with the Draconis to kill something in the hero phase that, and then kill something in the shooting phase. Strategically, this is so much utility, right? You can roar or stomp. You can count as 5 models on an objective. So 4 of these guys outpace most of the Idoneth army, because you can whittle down the thralls as you fight them and then just steal objectives. Save stacking because they're 3-up save. Hunters of the Heartland, they're such a good unit.
The utility is the utility of a single Stormdrake Guard unit in any other list like Annihilators or what have you is insane. Just for that roar. Because like we mentioned, Idoneth always just want to be battle regiment. They have no protection against monstrous rampages. And being able to reduce their save stacking and cut through what is already a pretty fragile army is insanely good.
Yeah. Now, I don't personally think that going all dragons is the way to go, but having two or 4 dragons is a very useful thing to have.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of dragons, we've got Fulminators, Concussors, and Tempesters. They have a very favorable matchup against Idoneth because pretty much everything the Stormdrake got going for them, but the Dracots do more damage per point. Right.
Basically, yeah. And like we mentioned how hybrid units are just good. Having Dracots that can shoot more wounds, charge in, and then delete things with -2 rend, 2 or 3 damage, or having mobile crossbows on Tempesters, just insanely good.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you shoot a screen, and then you charge in and finish off another thing. Tempesters are quite good into Idoneth because of that hybrid style they have.
Tempesters are basically like our sharks, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Very similar. I remember when I first saw the Allopex War Scroll, I jumped into the Discord, and I was like, hey guys, check this out. It's so similar to Tempesters. It has to be good, right?
Yeah.
Chariots have a large base. It takes up a lot of space. That can make it difficult for enemies to fly over it, like we've been talking about. They love to do flyover charges. 3-up save with 12 wounds, and you don't lose a single inch of board space until they take all 12 wounds. And that's really hard to do on a 3-up save for Idoneth.
Mm-hmm.
12-inch move in Mortal Wounds means they're not like a slow screen like Liberators, and Mortal Wounds on the charge is really good against the turtle because it can bracket it if you do an additional shooting on top of that. It could kill a bunch of thralls just from charging, and then from fighting with the spear you can wipe them out. Yeah, chariots are great. Nice little 165-point packages.
Yeah, I've actually quite grown to like them just for that matchup. And we keep mentioning this, but their ability to deny board space with their large base is extremely underrated. It's really
good.
Good.
Put 2 of these guys 90 degrees, like you're drifting into combat. You're going to cover a lot of space with them.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, let's take a look at, I think my favorite 2 units against Idoneth are Protectors and Annihilators, and they serve very different roles, even though they're very similar in appearance and keywords. So let's talk about Protectors first, because they're a 2-up save all the time, and you can ignore Rend 3 with All Out Defense, a Lantern, and Mystic Shield, which all of those are very hard for Idoneth to stop because they can't roar you efficiently, they can't deny your spells efficiently, and Lantern can't be stopped. So you could actually have a unit that's a 2+ save all the time, even against the King. Like their super kill King that they're so proud of, Protectors just laugh at it. 15 wounds on a 2-up. They're not getting through that.
Yeah, they're not getting through that.
And if you reinforce it, 30 wounds. Oh my god. Amazing. Then they hit back really hard too. 5 attacks a model at base 3s and 3s rend 2. That can be pumped up to 2s and 2s fairly easily in Stormcast. Then you have Star Soul Maces, which just do mortal wounds. And if you have a +1 attack buff like Unleash Thy Hatred, you're going to do explosive mortal wounds. Like you're just going to delete something the turn you fight.
Yep. Oh yeah. This is really funny, but Carl's actually building a list with 20 Protectors in Andrasta. So
we've been there. We talked about that.
Yeah, and it could potentially, especially if you can Scions and teleport just onto objectives. There's not much they can do to remove you. They just don't have the rend and output.
It's tough, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've definitely talked about the Andrasta Protector list, and we found it wanting. So I think Carl will probably get there in his decisions at the end too.
That's fine. He's a dedicated Deepkin player. I'll wait for him to realize it on its own.
The 3-inch range on Protectors makes them really good for putting behind a screen and then piling in 3 inches and then fighting another 3 inches because they can hit a lot of stuff like that. But all these things kind of don't matter because they're slow as heck. They can only move 4 inches. Idoneth you fight Idoneth by being aggressive, and Protectors are not aggressive. Hoping for a 9-inch charge or a 7-inch charge after you wild form and translocate, unreliable. not worth bringing. I think there's more reliable strategies you can use.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, Annihilators. They are basically the aggressive version of Protectors. Anywhere on the board, they can just drop in, which is tremendous because Idoneth really want to control your movement. And like Celestin Prime, these guys come down and say, no, we're doing things my way. The rest of your army can be deployed super far back if you think they're going to do like a reversal. You can deploy the rest of your army very far back, translocate your shooting forward, and then just drop in Annihilators with Grand Hammers right away. Fantastic way to be very aggressive on turn 1. Idoneth typically don't have that much screening, so sometimes when you just drop in, kill a bunch of Thralls, shoot the rest of them down, and then charge in past them, it's really easy to get into the meaty center with the Annihilators.
Absolutely, and actually, I think this unit really threatens how Idoneth play, because realistically, there's nothing stopping Idoneth from being super aggressive turn 1 with their mix of melee and shooting. Like, they don't have to get in melee, but they could potentially get every shooting unit they have in range of whatever you have. The reason they don't do this is because they need to maintain a very specific formation to make sure Annihilators aren't dropping in their backlines and just ruining their entire game plan. And this unit really lets you do that.
Yeah, you're right. They can be aggressive. But the thing is, like, the punishment if they are improperly aggressive and if they don't do significant damage, the punishment for it is losing the game. So they tend not to be very aggressive because it's too risky.
Mm-hmm.
And Stormcast are also, it's really risky to try to fight Stormcast in that way without like Rend 3 attacks. It's rough.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty good list of Stormcast units. If you guys think we missed any, or if you think we got something totally wrong about Idoneth, either in terms of how they play or how you should play against them, then feel free to leave us a comment on YouTube. We go through the comments and read them, and it's a lot of fun. Or if you want to, you can jump in our Discord server. There should be a link in the description below. So, any parting thoughts, Mergonk?
Yeah, guys, build your crossbow adjudicators and get in some reps. This matchup's going to be important.
Yeah, Idoneth are going to be a popular army at the tournament scene because when they are played well, they stomp people because they just don't know how to play against them. So crossbow adjudicators are going to be great against them, and spoiler, they're going to be great against every other battle tome they're releasing. Okay, that does it for us, guys. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.
See you next time, guys.